"He's impressive," Elena said, and the glass in Adrian Valenti's hand cracked. Not shattered, not dropped. Cracked, a single fracture line running from his thumb to the base like the man himself in that moment. A hairline break in something that had never broken before. The entire table went silent. 4 of his most senior men stopped breathing. Because in 12 years of watching Adrian Valenti run the most powerful organization in Chicago, not one of them had ever seen his hand shake, and it was shaking now. If you're watching this story for the first time, welcome. Subscribe to the channel. Follow along until the very end and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The gala had been Elena's idea. Not the attending, that was Adrian's business. His negotiation, his carefully arranged evening with the Delacroix family, whose shipping contracts were worth more than most small nations. But the specific table placement, the precise seating arrangement that put them near the east windows where the lighting was softer and the sightlines were better. That had been Elena's recommendation delivered 3 days earlier in a quiet conference room on the 42nd floor, while Adrian reviewed documents and pretended he wasn't listening to every word she said. He always listened to every word she said. That was his problem, and he knew it. Elena Moretti had been his executive assistant for 2 years, 4 months, and 11 days. He didn't count because he was sentimental. He counted because she was a resource, an asset, a precision instrument in a machine that required precision instruments. She managed his schedule with the calm efficiency of someone who had long stopped being frightened of him, which was either the most dangerous quality a person could have in his world or the most valuable. He had decided over time that it was both. She was 31 years old. She had a graduate degree in international business from Northwestern, spoke 4 languages fluently, and a 5th badly enough that she always apologized for it in advance. And she had walked into his office on her first day wearing a dark blazer and carrying a leather notebook that she still used to this day, refusing every offer of a tablet or a digital system. "Paper doesn't crash," she had told him. "Paper doesn't get hacked. Paper doesn't auto-correct your name into something embarrassing in front of clients." He had almost smiled. He hadn't, but it had been close. She had stayed. Other assistants had lasted weeks, sometimes months. One had lasted 11 days before submitting his resignation letter via email from a different country. Elena had simply stayed learning the rhythms of his world with the focused attention of a person who genuinely wanted to understand things, rather than just survive them. That was the difference. She didn't survive him. She understood him. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. The Bella Vita Gala was held on the top floor of a building that had cost more to construct than most of the city blocks surrounding it. 1,200 guests, political figures, old money families, new money entrepreneurs, and the particular breed of powerful person who existed in the careful space between legitimate business and everything else. Adrian moved through rooms like that, the way water moved downhill with total inevitability and without appearing to try. Elena moved through them like a person paying attention. She noticed things. That was another quality he had cataloged about her, added to the mental file he kept and never examined too closely. She noticed when someone's smile didn't reach their eyes. She noticed when a handshake lasted a half-second too long. She noticed when a conversation was being had for the benefit of the people listening rather than the people speaking. She had once leaned close during a negotiation and murmured barely audible, "He's stalling. His partner hasn't arrived yet. Give it 8 minutes." She had been right to the minute. That was 4 months into her employment. He had stopped doubting her assessments after that. The Delacroix meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock, giving them 90 minutes to navigate the social portion of the evening first. Adrian did not enjoy social portions of evenings. He tolerated them. He was excellent at tolerating things while appearing to enjoy them, which was a skill that had served him well for most of his adult life. Elena stood beside him in the early part of the evening, holding a glass of sparkling water and occasionally making the precise small talk that the situation required. She was good at small talk. Not in a hollow way, she was good at it because she was genuinely curious about people, which meant her questions were real, and her interest was real, and people could feel the difference. He watched her occasionally. Not staring, he never stared, but in the way he monitored things that mattered to him, peripherally, steadily. Then her friend appeared, Greta Lund, a public relations consultant who had somehow ended up on the guest list and who had known Elena since graduate school, which meant she possessed a version of Elena that Adrian had never encountered. The version that existed before his world, before his schedule, before the careful professional composure that Elena wore in his presence like a second skin. Greta hugged Elena, the way old friends hugged each other with genuine force and no concern for the social setting. And Elena laughed a real laugh, surprised and warm. And for just a moment, Adrian saw something he rarely saw. Elena entirely unguarded. It lasted about 4 seconds. Then she seemed to remember where she was pulled back and made introductions with smooth professionalism. Adrian responded appropriately. Greta was clearly trying to assess him without appearing to assess him, which was a reasonable thing to attempt, and an unsuccessful one. He had been assessed by professionals. Greta Lund, for all her warmth, was not managing to conceal her curiosity about what kind of man Elena Moretti had ended up working for. "You should stay after the formal portion," Greta was telling Elena. "There's a dessert reception on the terrace. The whole crowd shifts at 11, the boring people go home, and the interesting ones come out." Elena glanced at him, a quick professional flicker at check-in. He said with perfect neutrality, "We have flexibility," which was not something he normally said. He didn't have flexibility. He had schedules. Elena looked at him for just a beat longer than necessary, as if she'd noticed the anomaly, and then turned back to her friend. That was when Greta leaned in. Adrian wasn't meant to hear it. She pitched her voice low, angled her body slightly away, did all the things people did when they wanted to share something in a crowded room without broadcasting it. But Adrian had spent his entire adult life reading rooms, reading people, catching the things that were meant to stay hidden. He heard the words as clearly as if Greta had spoken them directly to him. "Did you see Matteo Rossi? He came in about 20 minutes ago. He's even more attractive in person." A pause. Elena glanced across the room. A brief casual scan. Then she turned back to her friend with a small smile at the corner of her mouth. "Honestly," she said, "he's impressive." The glass cracked. Adrian became aware of it in the same moment. He became aware of every other sensation, the pressure of 300 people in a room, the soft orchestral music that had been playing all evening, the distant murmur of a dozen simultaneous conversations, and beneath all of it, a feeling moving through him that he had no organized category for. He looked at his hand. The glass hadn't shattered, the fracture was internal, a single dark line running through the crystal. His grip had done it. He had gripped the glass the way he gripped things when he was controlling something, when he was managing pressure, and apparently he had gripped it harder than he intended. He set it down. Quietly. On a passing server's tray without drawing attention to it. He looked across the room at Matteo Rossi. He knew the name. Of course he knew the name. 38 years old Italian-born entrepreneur, built his first technology company at 25 and sold it at 29. For a number that had circulated through certain financial circles for months afterward. Now running an investment firm with interests in sustainable infrastructure and data security. Legitimate. Successful. Clean in ways that Adrian's world never quite managed to be. Objectively attractive if you were the kind of person who made that assessment. Which Adrian was not. Which Adrian never was. He looked back at Elena. She was saying something else to Greta now, gesturing slightly, and her expression had moved on to some other topic entirely. She had said those two words, "He's impressive," and put them down, and moved forward, the way she always moved forward, without looking back. She didn't notice what had happened. She didn't notice his hand. She didn't notice the silence that had passed through his 4 nearby men, like a cold wind. Because Elena Moretti, for all her extraordinary perceptiveness, had never once in 2 years and 4 months and 11 days looked at Adrian Valenti and wondered if he might want something he couldn't put into a schedule. "Impressive," he said. His voice was completely even, controlled. The voice he used when a negotiation was going in a direction he hadn't anticipated, and he needed to redirect without showing that he was redirecting. Elena turned toward him. Her expression was open, slightly puzzled by the interruption. Yes, his infrastructure work in Southeast Asia is remarkable. The model he built for clean water access in rural communities. There was an article in the Financial Review last quarter that broke it down. The financing structure alone was genuinely his business achievements. Yes, only his business achievements. She looked at him. A full look this time. Not the peripheral professional check-ins she performed throughout most evenings. A direct, complete, slightly narrowed look that meant she was examining something and intended to understand it. "Are you asking as my employer?" she said, "or as someone who is currently jealous?" The word landed in the 6 inches of air between them like something physical. Around them, 4 men in dark suits found urgent reasons to look at the floor, the ceiling, the middle distance. Nobody used that word around Adrian Valenti. Not in that context. Not in any context that touched on his personal interior, which was a territory that people who valued their continued comfort did not enter uninvited. Elena had said it the way she said most things, directly, clearly, without softening it into a question that didn't mean what it asked. He looked at her. She looked back at him. Neither of them looked away. "We have a meeting at 10 o'clock, he said. "I know, with the Delacroix family. I arranged the meeting, Adrian. I'm aware." "Then we should—" "You didn't answer the question." Silence. Not the silence of an empty room. The silence of a very full one in which approximately a dozen people within earshot were doing exceptional work pretending they weren't listening. "No," Adrian said. "No what?" "No, I'm not jealous." Elena held his gaze for one more moment. Then she nodded the small professional nod she used when she was noting something without commenting on it further, and turned back toward the room. "Good," she said. "Then we should probably head toward the East Wing. The Delacroix contingent arrived 7 minutes ago. They'll be ready." She moved away, composed, steady. Adrian stood exactly where he was for 3 full seconds, which was approximately 3 seconds longer than he normally remained still in any situation. Then he followed her, because that was what he did. Had always done. He was beginning to realize, and had simply found other explanations for it. The Delacroix meeting lasted 45 minutes and went precisely as planned. Elena sat to his left, her notebook open, her pen, moving occasionally, her presence beside him as natural and functional as breathing. He was aware of her the entire time. Not in a way that interfered with the meeting, he managed the conversation with the same focused control he brought to every negotiation, tracking the subtext of every statement, reading the body language of the 3 Delacroix representatives with the accuracy that 2 decades of practice had given him. He said the right things. He made the right concessions in the right sequence. He brought the conversation to exactly the conclusion he had planned for it. But the entire time, on some level that ran parallel to the negotiation without intersecting it, he was aware of Elena. Aware of the way she caught his eye when the eldest Delacroix started a sentence that was going to go somewhere problematic, giving him a half-second of warning. Aware of the way she filled in a precise, factual reference at exactly the moment he needed it, sliding it into the conversation without making it obvious that she had prepared for this specific contingency. Aware of the 3 inches of distance between her chair and his. He had never noticed those 3 inches before. He was noticing them now, with an acuity that he found deeply inconvenient. When the meeting concluded and the Delacroix representatives departed with handshakes and the particular satisfied expressions of people who believed they had done well, Elena closed her notebook and said, "The infrastructure clause will need to be reviewed before the formal contract stage. I'll flag it with the legal team Monday morning." "Yes. And the secondary partner, they mentioned the one they're bringing in for the Eastern expansion. I'll run a background on him this week. There's something in how they referenced him that didn't sit right." "I noticed." "I know you did." A brief pause. "Do you want to stay for the dessert reception?" He should have said no. The business of the evening was concluded. The social portion had served its purpose. There was no operational reason to remain. For a short time, he said. She didn't say anything. But the small professional nod happened again, and she stood and adjusted her jacket, and he noticed that she allowed a brief half-smile to pass across her face before her expression settled back into its composed professional arrangement. He filed that away. He seemed to be filing a great many things away this evening. The terrace was cooler, and Greta Lund was there with 3 other people who had clearly known Elena for a long time, and who regarded Adrian with the combined expression of people who were trying to be polite while also trying to figure him out. He was used to that expression. He was not used to not caring whether he passed the assessment. With Elena's friends, he found for the first time in a considerable while that he genuinely didn't care. The conversation moved easily. These were educated professional people who could talk about the world with substance, and Elena moved through it naturally, laughing when something was funny, pushing back when she disagreed, asking questions that drew other people out. She was the same here as she was in his conference rooms. Not a different person in a different context, just herself consistently without effort. That was the thing he had never seen in his world. Consistency. The people around him shaped themselves to what was required of them. They wore whatever face the moment needed. Elena simply had one face, and wore it everywhere, and somehow that single face was equal to every room. He was watching her explain something, a decision she'd made years ago, leaving a corporate law track to go into business operations, which apparently surprised her old friends every time they revisited it when someone joined their group. Matteo Rossi. He arrived with the easy confidence of someone who moved through social settings without ever feeling the friction of them. Warm handshake for Greta, who had apparently met him before. A polite acknowledgement of the others. Then his eyes reached Elena, and something happened in them. Nothing dramatic, nothing that the people around them would have noticed. Just a very slight intensification of focus, a small shift in the quality of attention, the way a person looked when they saw something they found genuinely interesting. Adrian noticed it. Adrian noticed it the way he noticed everything, with the total involuntary accuracy of a man who had trained himself to read exactly these micro-expressions in exactly these situations, and he wished for the first time that his own training was less precise. "Elena Moretti," Rossi said, "I was hoping to run into you this evening. I read your analysis of the Contari logistics structure, the one that ran in the operations journal last spring." Elena's eyebrows lifted. "You read that?" "I did. The leverage mapping in the 3rd section was some of the clearest thinking I've seen on regional distribution challenges in years. I wanted to ask you about the methodology." And Elena, the precise professional who filed his contracts and flagged his legal clauses and told him without flinching that he was being jealous, lit up, not in a way she hid. Not with any self-consciousness about it. Just lit up the way a person lit up when someone engaged with something they had actually worked on, something they were actually proud of. The methodology was mostly borrowed from infrastructure analysis work, she said, and her voice had the quality it got when she was talking about something she genuinely understood, quick and specific and warm. The novelty was in the application. Most people treat logistics as a cost problem and miss that it's fundamentally a relationship problem. "Exactly what I thought," Rossi said. He had positioned himself slightly toward Elena. Not obviously, not rudely, but in the way people positioned themselves when they were directing a conversation at a specific person. The others in the group were still included technically, but the conversation was between these 2 people, and everyone could feel it. Adrian stood to Elena's left. He did not move. He did not contribute to the conversation. He stood with the stillness he was known for, the absolute controlled stillness that people mistook for calm, and that was in reality the external form of a great deal of internal activity. He listened to Elena talk about logistics frameworks with an Italian entrepreneur who was looking at her like she was one of the most interesting people he had encountered in months. He felt something moving through him that he had no vocabulary for. He had anger he was familiar with that had categorized it, understood how to manage it. He had concern and wariness, and the particular cold clarity of threat assessment. He had the occasional flash of something that might be called satisfaction. He had never in his adult life had this. This was something that lived below the level of thought. A physical thing. A tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with physical threat, and everything to do with the way Matteo Rossi was looking at Elena Moretti, and the way Elena was failing to notice that the man beside her, the man she had worked beside for over 2 years, was in the process of an experience he had no framework for. Greta Lund, who was clearly a perceptive woman with a good view of the situation, caught Adrian's expression. Their eyes met. He made his expression neutral immediately, but not before she saw something. He could tell from the way her own expression shifted, a careful blankness replacing her earlier sociability, the blankness of a person choosing not to react to what they'd just seen. She looked at Elena, then back at Adrian. Then she said at a perfectly timed conversational lull, "Elena, didn't you say you needed to connect with someone from the Hargrove Foundation tonight?" It was a rope thrown over a cliff, transparent and well-intentioned. Elena blinked. Yes, actually. Excuse me, I should find—" "Allow me," Rossi said, immediately smooth and without hesitation. "I know Paul Hargrove. I can make the introduction. He's just inside." And before anything could be redirected, they had moved away together. Elena and Matteo Rossi, toward the interior of the building, leaving Adrian standing on the terrace with Greta Lund, and the particular feeling of a man watching something happen that he has no operational procedure for stopping. "She talks about you," Greta said. Her voice was quiet, not conspiratorial, honest. A statement offered without agenda. Adrian turned toward her. "Not the way employees usually talk about their bosses," Greta continued. "She doesn't complain about you, which is actually unusual in itself. She explains you, like she's the only person who has the right translation for something most people get wrong." He said nothing. "She's been doing that for a long time," Greta said. "Translating you, whether you knew it or not." He looked at the doorway through which Elena had disappeared. "Does she know," he said, "that you're telling me this?" "No? Why are you telling me?" A pause. Then Greta Lund did something unexpected. She smiled not warmly, but with the precision of a person who understood a situation clearly and felt no need to dress it up. "Because she's brilliant, and she's loyal, and she has been standing next to you for 2 years, and I think you've been looking at her schedule instead of her." She picked up her glass. "And because the way you just watched Matteo Rossi talk to her was not the way a boss looks at an employee." She moved away, then joining the other group, leaving Adrian alone with the terrace and the city laid out below it, and the thing moving through his chest that he still didn't have a word for. Camd. Elena came back 20 minutes later, alone. She found him where she knew he'd be. He was always where she expected him to be. It was one of his qualities, a kind of reliable geography, and she had her professional expression in place, her notebook tucked under her arm. "Hargrove was useful," she said. "They're interested in the community health initiative. I got a contact." "Good." She looked at him. He was looking at the city. "Adrian? We should go." "We should, yes." She didn't move. "Are you going to tell me what's happening?" "Nothing's happening. You've been standing on this terrace for 20 minutes staring at the skyline while Matteo Rossi introduced me to 3 people you probably should have met yourself tonight." He turned to face her. She met his gaze. She always met his gaze. From the first day she had never looked away, never adjusted herself in that anxious way people adjusted when they were near him. She just looked at him steadily, like he was a person instead of a force of nature. It was, he thought, the most audacious thing about her, and there was significant competition for that designation. "He finds you interesting," Adrian said. "Professionally. We talked about logistics methodology for Elena. Her name. Just her name in a tone he didn't normally use, without the professional coding, without the management of distance." She went quiet. "He was looking at you," Adrian said. "The way people look at things they intend to pursue." A pause. "You were watching us," she said. "I was present. I noticed things." "You were watching us specifically." He had no adequate response to that. Elena tilted her head very slightly. In the light of the terrace, her expression was doing something complicated, something that moved between professionalism and something else, something with an edge of careful attention that he recognized because it was the same attention she turned on everything she was trying to understand. "Are you worried about Matteo Rossi's intentions toward your interests?" she asked. "Is this about business?" He held her gaze. "No," he said. "It's not about business." The honest words arriving without planning, without the usual filtration. She looked at him for a long moment. The city hummed below them. The gala went on without them inside 1,200 people, moving through their carefully constructed evening. None of them out here on this terrace, in this particular silence, with these two particular people standing in the aftermath of a sentence that had changed the geography of the space between them. "We should go," Elena said finally. Her voice was careful now, a different kind of careful than her professional precision. This was the careful of someone who had been handed something unexpected and was holding it with both hands, making sure not to drop it. "Yes," Adrian said. They went. In the car on the way back, he sat in his usual position, not watching her apparently, while she looked out the window. His phone was in his pocket. Her notebook was in her hands. Neither of them spoke. That was normal. They often did not speak in cars. Silence had never been uncomfortable between them. This silence was different, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so. At her building, she gathered her things and said professionally that she would have the meeting notes summarized by morning. He said that was fine. She opened the door. Then she stopped. Without turning fully from the edge of the open door, she said, "For what it's worth." He waited. "He was objectively impressive," she said. "Matteo Rossi, his work is remarkable." A pause. "But he spent the whole 20 minutes asking me questions about you." She got out, closed the door, walked toward her building with the same steady stride she walked everywhere. Adrian did not look away until she was inside. He looked at the place where she had been for a moment longer. Then he said to his driver, "Drive." They drove. And for the entire ride back across the city, he had controlled for a decade through the streets. His name meant something. In past the buildings that bore his indirect signature in 100 different ways. Adrian Valenti sat with the knowledge that a woman had just given him information he didn't know how to process. She hadn't been looking at Matteo Rossi. She hadn't needed to be reminded of where she was. She had simply said, without any performance attached to it, "He spent the whole 20 minutes asking questions about you." Which meant she had noticed. Which meant she had noticed something worth noticing. Which meant that Elena Moretti, who noticed everything, had been paying attention to the same thing he had from a different direction. He pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. In 2 years and 4 months and 11 days, he had maintained exactly the professional distance that his world required. He had categorized her as essential, as irreplaceable, as the most competent person in his immediate orbit by a considerable margin. He had managed until approximately 2 hours ago to leave it there. The glass with the hairline fracture was in a trash bin somewhere in the Bella Vita building. His hand had not shaken since. The feeling in his chest was still present, changed now from its original form into something quieter, something that had settled into him the way permanent things settled. He thought about the way she had laughed when Greta hugged her, the way she had lit up talking about logistics methodology with someone who understood her work, the way she had stood on the terrace and said his name Adrian in a tone that had no professional coding on it, the way she had stopped in the car door and told him without being asked what had actually happened in those 20 minutes. He thought about all of those things, and he understood with the clarity of a man who had spent his entire life being honest about difficult truths once he could no longer avoid them that he was in an enormous amount of trouble. Not the kind of trouble he knew how to manage. Not the kind with a solution that involved control. The kind that arrived when the most dangerous thing in your world was not what was coming for you. It was what was already there, sitting 3 inches away from you every day, and had been for 2 years and 4 months and 11 days. And you had only just cracked the glass. The meeting notes were on his desk by 6:45 the next morning, not emailed, printed. Set in the center of his desk with a paper clip and a small yellow note in Elena's handwriting. Hargrove contact added to the foundation file. Delacroix infrastructure clause flagged for legal. Marcus, already aware, expects to have language by Wednesday. He read the note twice. Then he read it a third time, which was not something he did with documents. He set it down and poured his coffee and stood at the window and thought about nothing in particular for approximately 4 minutes, which was 3 minutes and 50 seconds longer than he normally spent thinking about nothing. His phone showed 3 messages from Marco. His head of operations sent between midnight and 2 in the morning, the kind of messages that required responses, that had operational weight, that under normal circumstances would have pulled his attention the moment he unlocked the screen. He read them. He set the phone down. He picked up Elena's note again. Marco's messages waited another 11 minutes, which had never happened before in the history of their working relationship. Adrian responded to operational communications the way he responded to everything in his professional life, immediately, precisely, without delay. He was aware that this morning was different. He simply chose not to examine why, which was itself a form of examination. Elena arrived at 8 o'clock as she always did, not 8:02, not 7:58. 8 o'clock because she had decided that was when she arrived, and she was a person who kept her own decisions. She set her bag at her desk, made her coffee, and knocked on his office doorframe at 8:07. Exactly the amount of time she needed to settle in before beginning the day. He had the schedule memorized without trying. It had simply entered him over 2 years, the way all consistent things eventually did. "Good morning," she said. "I need 20 minutes for the Monday brief, but I want to flag something first." "Come in." She sat across from him. Her notebook was open. She had a pen in her hand. This was exactly what every Monday morning looked like, except that his office felt different than it had last Monday morning, and he suspected she felt it too, because she opened her notebook and then paused for just a fraction of a second longer than her pauses normally ran. "The Delacroix secondary partner," she said. "His name is Victor Sabo. I ran him Friday night when I got home. You ran a background check Friday night. You pay for 24-hour research access. Someone should use it." She flipped a page. Sabo has connections to 3 companies that were investigated. Not charged, investigated for irregular financial routing in Eastern European markets over the last 6 years. Nothing that stuck. Nothing on record. But the pattern is there if you look at the company structures. Adrian looked at her. "You did this Friday night," he said. "After the gala, yes. Instead of whatever you think I do on Friday nights." A brief pause, almost dry. "I work, Adrian, you know this." He did know this. He had always known this. He had simply never thought about what it meant that she went home from evenings that were supposed to be social and ran background checks on people because something in a conversation had flagged her attention. He thought about it now. "Send everything to Marcus," he said, "and to legal before the Wednesday call." "Already done. Sent at 11:47 Friday." She looked up from her notebook. "I also sent you a summary. Check your email, the one from last week, not this morning. It's in there." He opened his email. Found it. Read the subject line, "Sabo preliminary, concerns not urgent, FYI only." Sent at 11:47 p.m. on a Friday after a 3-hour gala. He closed the email. "Elena." "Yes. Do you ever stop working?" She considered the question with genuine seriousness, as she considered all questions. "I stop when the work stops," she said. "The work doesn't stop very often. That's my work. I'm aware. You employ me to do it." He looked at her across his desk. She looked back at him with the open, unguarded directness that was simply her natural state. Most people performed openness. Elena had no mechanism for performing it. She was simply open in the way that people who had decided not to be afraid of things were open. "You should have a life outside this office," he said. The words arrived without planning, which was becoming a pattern that concerned him. Elena blinked. A genuine blink, a flash of surprise she didn't manage to conceal. I have a life outside this office. When? That's a very strange question. It's a direct question. It's an intrusive one. But she said it without heat, with the particular calm of someone who could call a thing what it was without needing it to be a confrontation. I have friends, Adrian. I have a life. I went to Greta's birthday dinner last month. I run 3 mornings a week. I read actual books. A pause. I just also happen to run background checks on Friday nights, when something at a gala doesn't sit right. He nodded. He should have moved on to the Monday brief. That was the logical sequence. She had come in with a purpose, and the purpose was the week's scheduling, and there was significant operational material to cover. He said, "Do you find Matteo Rossi interesting?" The question sat in the room between them. Elena set her pen down. Slowly. With deliberate care, the way she set things down when she was making a decision about how to respond to something. Professionally, she said. Yes, his work is genuinely... You know that's not what I'm asking. A pause. I know, she said. Silence. She picked up her pen. Didn't write anything. Adrian, we have a full Monday brief and Marcus needs you at 10. We have 45 minutes. I'm using 30 of them to brief you on the week. That leaves 15. For what? He held her gaze. For an honest answer. Elena looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across her face. Not discomfort, not quite. Something more considered than discomfort. The expression of a woman who was deciding how much honesty the current situation could hold. I think Matteo Rossi is intelligent and accomplished, she said carefully. I think he is the kind of man that most people would find impressive and most people would be right to. I think the conversation we had was professionally stimulating. A pause. And I think he spent most of it asking about you. Adrian went very still. Specifically, Elena continued. He wanted to know how you make decisions, your process, whether you're as controlled as you appear or whether the control is his word performative. She tilted her head. He's very curious about you. That's not unusual. No, but the specific questions were. She opened her notebook again. He asked how long I'd worked with you, what your actual decision-making looked like when the operational stakes were highest, whether you ever lost control. She looked up. I told him I'd worked with you for over 2 years and that you were the most consistently controlled person I'd ever encountered. And he said, consistently controlled people are either very stable or holding something at very high tension, and the only way to know which is to find what happens when they finally let go. The sentence fell into the room with the weight of something thrown. Adrian said nothing. Elena watched him. He's interested in you, Adrian, as a phenomenon, a case study, something to understand. Or a competitor to assess, possibly both. She tilted her head. Or he was using curiosity about you as a way to extend a conversation with me. I genuinely don't know. What do you think? I think, she said slowly, that both can be true at the same time, and that people are usually doing at least 3 things simultaneously when they talk to strangers at galas. He looked at her. She looked back at him. Brief me on the week, he said. She did. Oh, the week that followed was on the surface entirely normal. On the surface. Below the surface, Elena began noticing things. Small things. The kind of things that were either new or had always been there, and she was only now paying the right quality of attention to them. He started asking for her opinion in meetings, where he had never previously asked for it, not because he needed the input, but as though he wanted her voice in the room. Wanted the moment where she said something, and the other people around the table shifted, recalibrated, took her seriously in a way that required his visible regard of her to authorize. She had always had authority in his spaces, but it had been functional authority. The authority of the person who controlled access, who managed information, who knew things other people didn't. This was different. This was him making space for her specifically in contexts where space-making was a signal. She noticed. She noticed when he held doors in a way that was slightly different from before. Not the absent professional courtesy that had always been there, but something more deliberate, slower. She noticed that he remembered on Wednesday that she had mentioned in passing 3 weeks ago that the coffee machine on the executive floor had been making something that tasted like it had been filtered through regret, and when she arrived Wednesday morning, there was a different machine. He said nothing about it. She said nothing about it. But she stood in front of that coffee machine for a moment and thought about the fact that he had heard that comment, filed it, and acted on it at some point between then and now, quietly, without announcement. He had always been attentive. 2 years had taught her that. He caught things. He remembered details. He processed the world with a thoroughness that most people reserved for things they cared deeply about. The question she was now sitting with over a cup of very good coffee on a Wednesday morning was whether the detail-catching had always included her the way it apparently now did, or whether something had changed on a Friday night on a terrace when she'd said the word jealous and watched something shift in the face of a man who didn't shift. Greta called on Thursday. "So," Greta said without preamble as she always opened calls. "So?" Elena said. "You want to tell me what happened after I left you on that terrace?" "Nothing happened." Elena. "We went to the car. I gave him an update on the Hargrove contact. We drove back." "That's the professional version." "That's the version." A pause on the line. Elena could hear the particular silence of Greta, deciding how hard to push. "He was watching you the entire time you were talking to Matteo Rossi," Greta said. Not in a protective boss way, not in a security-concerned way, in a specific way." Greta. "I'm just telling you what I saw." "I know what you saw." "Then you know what I'm saying." Elena sat down on the corner of her desk. Through the interior glass, she could see Adrian's office, where he was currently on the phone with what was probably Tokyo, given the time zone he had. Japan calls on Thursday mornings. He was turned slightly away. She could see the line of his shoulders, the stillness of them, the way he held himself on calls completely still processing. "He's my employer," she said. "I know. I've worked with him for over 2 years. I know. And the world he operates in is, I know, Elena, I know all of it. I'm not telling you to do anything. I'm telling you what I saw." A pause. "And I'm telling you that when he looked at you, and I mean when he really looked at you, not the professional monitoring thing he does, but the moment when Matteo was talking to you and Adrian thought no one was watching him." Greta stopped. "He looked afraid." The word landed differently than Elena expected it to. Not surprising exactly, but significant. "He doesn't get afraid," Elena said. "Everyone gets afraid," Greta said. "The question is, what of?" On Friday, something happened that Elena hadn't planned for. She was working late, which was not unusual, finishing the quarterly analysis that the Delacroix legal team needed before their Monday call. Adrian had left at 7:30, or she had assumed he had, because his coat was gone, and the light in his office was off and his car had been called. At 9:15 his office door opened. He was still there. He had been in the private conference room at the back, which had its own entrance, which she hadn't known because he had never used it in the evenings before. He came out with his jacket off and his sleeves pushed up and his phone in his hand, and he stopped when he saw her. "You're still here," he said. "So are you." A pause. He looked at her desk, at the spread of documents at the coffee cup that had clearly been refilled several times. The Delacroix analysis. Quarterly breakdown. I want to have it clean before Marcus sees it Monday. He came and stood beside her desk, looked at the documents. His expression did the thing it did when he was reading a very complete stillness, his eyes moving quickly, processing at a speed she had spent 2 years learning to respect. "The revenue projection in Section 3 is off," he said. She looked, found it. 6% error. I'll fix it. "The currency conversion," he said. "It was using last quarter's rate." "Yes." She pulled the correct figure. "Thank you." He stayed where he was, standing beside her desk, which he didn't normally do. He had his own desk, his own spaces, his own clear geography within the office that she had learned and moved around without thinking. He didn't stand at her desk. He had never in 2 years stood this close to where she worked. She typed the correction, saved the document. He still hadn't moved. "Adrian," she said without looking up. "Yes." "Why are you still here?" A pause. "I had calls," he said. "Your calls ended at 9. I can see your calendar." He said nothing. "You could have taken them from home," she said. "You have a full setup there. You always use home for late calls." "I stayed." She looked up at him. He looked down at her. In the empty office, with the city visible through the windows and the quiet of a building that had otherwise gone home, this was a different version of themselves than the ones they occupied in daylight. Not unprofessional. Not anything that could be pointed at or named. Just different. Quieter. Without the structure of meetings and agendas and the constant arrival of things that needed managing. "You stayed," she said, "because I was here." He didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it. And that was the confirmation. She turned back to her document. She could feel her own pulse doing something unusual, which she filed away to examine later when she was alone, and could be honest with herself about it. "Go home, Adrian," she said. Quietly. Not unkindly. "When you finish." "That could be another hour." "I'm aware." She looked at him again. "I know you don't need anything," he said. And something in his voice was different. The professional coating was thinner than usual, worn down by the week, and the late hour, and the particular honesty that empty buildings produced. "That's not why I'm here." She held his gaze. In over 2 years, she had looked at him directly in dozens of situations where other people looked away. She had held his gaze across negotiating tables when his expression was designed to be unreadable. She had held it across her own desk when she was telling him something he didn't want to hear. She had held it in moments of tension and frustration, and the occasional genuine anger, and she had never been the one to look away first. She looked away first. Not because she was afraid of what was in his expression, because she wasn't, and that was the thing she needed to sit with. 2 weeks after the gala. Matteo Rossi called the office. He didn't call Adrian's line. He called Elena's. She stared at the phone for one ring, identified the number, and answered it with the same professional composure she answered all calls, with which took slightly more effort than usual. "Mr. Rossi." "Ms. Moretti, I hope this is an acceptable time." "It's fine. What can I do for you?" "I'd like to arrange a meeting with Adrian Valenti," he said. "I have a proposal I think he'd find relevant, but..." A pause. "I thought it might go better if it came through you first. You seem to understand how he thinks." "I understand how he schedules," Elena said carefully. "No." Rossi's voice was pleasant but precise. "You understand how he thinks. There's a difference. I noticed it at the gala." She waited. "I'm proposing a joint venture," Rossi said. "Infrastructure development in 3 emerging markets. Clean money, legitimate structure, significant returns. The kind of move that builds a legacy rather than just a balance sheet." Another pause. "I think he'd consider it. But I think he'd consider it more seriously if you thought it was worth his time." Elena looked at the wall. There was something in what Rossi was doing that she was working to identify, not manipulation exactly, but a very specific form of strategy. He was smart enough to know that approaching Adrian directly with an unsolicited proposal was a particular kind of risk. He was smart enough to have identified that the person with the most effective access to Adrian's actual attention was not Marcus, not legal, not the board. It was her. That was either very perceptive or very concerning, and she wasn't sure yet which. "Send me the proposal documents," she said. "I'll review them and advise on appropriate next steps." "I appreciate that. Mr. Rossi." She kept her voice even. "I want to be clear about something. My role here is to serve Mr. Valenti's interests. If your proposal is genuinely worth his time, I'll say so, and he'll hear about it on those terms. If it's not, you'll hear from me, not from him. A pause. Then distinctly he laughed, not dismissively, with genuine appreciation. That, he said, is exactly why I called you first. She hung up and sat for a moment looking at the phone. Then she got up and knocked on Adrian's door. He looked up from the document he was reviewing. Matteo Rossi just called my line, she said. His expression did the thing she had learned to read over 2 years, the complete surface stillness that was not absence of reaction, but total containment of it, like pressure behind a very well-constructed wall. He wants a meeting, she said. He's proposing a joint venture. 3 emerging markets infrastructure focus. He says it's legitimate and the returns are significant. She watched his face. He called me because he thought I'd be a more effective avenue than going directly to you. The silence lasted 3 seconds. He's right, Adrian said. I know. She held his gaze. I told him I'd review the documents and advise. You'll review them, unless you'd rather I decline. He looked at her. No, he said. Review them. She nodded. Turned to go. Elena? She stopped. He called your line specifically. Yes. Not Marcus, not the main office. No. A pause. He's paying attention to the wrong things. She turned back to face him. He's paying attention to how you actually work, she said. Which means he's paying attention to me. Which is accurate in terms of operational reality. Adrian's jaw was doing the thing it did when he was managing something. A very small tension, barely visible, that she had learned to notice. The way you learn to notice anything that mattered. Is that a problem? She asked. He looked at her for a long moment. Not yet, he said. She reviewed the documents that evening. Spread across her kitchen table, with the precision and thoroughness she brought to everything, she went through Rossi's proposal, line by line. It was good. It was genuinely, substantially good. The structure was clean, the market analysis was sophisticated, the projected returns were conservative in ways that suggested real expertise, rather than optimistic decoration. She also looked for the seams. The places where clean proposals concealed less clean arrangements, where legitimate structure served as the surface layer of something else. She didn't find any, which could mean the proposal was exactly what it appeared to be, or it could mean she hadn't looked in the right places yet. She typed her preliminary notes at midnight. Detailed, honest with her actual assessment. Proposal appears legitimate. Returns are credible. Rossi's track record in comparable ventures is strong. Recommend further due diligence before meeting. Personal assessment. He is intelligent, he is strategic, and his interest in this partnership may be genuine. His interest in this office may be something more than professional. She stared at that last sentence, deleted it, rewrote it. His motives appear primarily professional. Additional scrutiny recommended. That was the accurate version. The professional version. The version that belonged in a business document and did not carry the weight of everything else that had been accumulating over the past 2 weeks. She saved the file, closed her laptop, sat in her kitchen at midnight and thought about Adrian Valenti standing beside her desk at 9:15 on a Friday evening saying, I know you don't need anything. That's not why I'm here. She thought about that for a long time. She was not a person who avoided honest assessments. She avoided them with other people, sometimes out of professionalism, out of the appropriate restraint that the working world required. But she didn't avoid them with herself. She never had. So she sat in her kitchen and she was honest with herself. She had noticed him. Long before the gala. Long before the cracked glass and the terrace conversation and Greta's voice on the phone saying he looked afraid. She had noticed him the way you notice things that were too significant to look at directly, so you looked at everything adjacent to them instead. She had learned his rhythms and his preferences and the subtle language of his expressions, not purely because that was her job, though it was. She had learned them because she was paying a quality of attention that professional necessity didn't entirely account for. She had known that in some quiet internal chamber for a while. She had simply been very effective at not opening the door to that chamber. The gala had opened it. Not dramatically, not with any single moment she could point to. But something had shifted in the geometry between them, and it had shifted in both directions simultaneously, and she was now a woman sitting at midnight in her kitchen, staring at a business proposal from a man who had spent their entire conversation asking about her employer and wondering what she was going to do with any of it. She went to bed. She did not sleep well. Monday morning she arrived at 8 o'clock, set her bag at her desk, made her coffee, stood for a moment in front of the good coffee machine, and let the fact of it sit with her. Then she knocked on his door at 8:07. "Rossi's proposal," she said, setting the printed summary on his desk. "My assessment is on page 3. Short version, it's worth a closer look, but I want another 2 weeks on due diligence before I'd recommend an actual meeting." He picked it up, read the first page. "Your objection," he said. "I don't have a specific objection. I have an instinct." He looked up. "I don't know enough about why he's bringing this to you specifically," she said. "His existing partners are significant. He doesn't need you for capital. He doesn't need you for connections. His network is substantial. So the question of what he actually wants from a partnership with Valenti interests is not yet clearly answered for me. What are the options? One, he wants exactly what the proposal says and chose you because you're the strongest available partner for this specific venture." She ticked off her fingers. 2, he wants something adjacent to this influence protection, access to markets you control that aren't in the proposal. 3, he wants information about how you operate, and this is a sophisticated form of intelligence gathering. Adrian was looking at her with the full attention he reserved for things that mattered. 4, he said. She waited. "He wants access to you," Adrian said. "Specifically." The words arrived without inflection, without anything attached to them except the flatness of a statement being made. She held his gaze. "That's not a business motive," she said. "No?" Adrian agreed. "It isn't." "Then it's not relevant to a business analysis." "I disagree." She tilted her head. "You think it's a security risk?" "I think," he said carefully, "that a man who is intelligent enough to identify the actual center of how this office functions and strategic enough to route his approach through that center, rather than around it, is a man worth watching with more than professional interest." Elena was quiet for a moment. "You're describing me as a vulnerability," she said. "I'm describing you as a person someone strategic might attempt to get close to." "Those aren't the same thing." "No," he said. "They're not." She watched him. He watched her. They had had dozens of conversations across this desk, hundreds of thousands of words between them over 2 years, and she had learned the particular architecture of how he communicated what he said, what he meant, and the territory between those two things that he never crossed directly. He was in that territory now. She could feel the edges of it. "Adrian," she said. "Yes. Are you concerned about me, or are you concerned about him?" A pause. A real one, not a professional calculation. "Both," he said. "And I'm aware that they're different concerns requiring different responses." She stood up, tucked her notebook under her arm, looked at him with the directness she had always brought to every version of this man in every difficult moment their working relationship had produced. "I can take care of myself," she said. "I know that. I've been doing it long before I worked here. I know that too." "Then stop looking at me like I'm something that needs protecting." He looked at her. His expression did something she couldn't fully read, which was unusual, because she could read most of his expressions by now. This one was layered, multiple things occupying the same space. "I'm not looking at you like something that needs protecting," he said. "Then what a beat. Like something I would very much prefer not to lose." The words sat in the room. Elena did not look away, but her chest did something that had no professional category. She stood there for 3 seconds, 4-5, looking at the most controlled man she had ever known, who had just said something in a quiet voice that had no operational function whatsoever, that served no strategic purpose, that cost him something she could see him paying in real time. "You should think about whether that's a feeling you want to keep having," she said finally. Her voice was level, steady. Her professional composure doing its job, even while something beneath it was paying close attention. "Because if it is, you should probably do something about it before someone else does." She walked out. She sat at her desk and opened her email and stared at it for approximately 90 seconds without reading a single word. Then Marcus came in with the week's operational briefing, and she stood up and put on the version of herself that the morning required the capable and precise and unflappable Elena Moretti, who ran this office like a second heartbeat. And from Adrian's office through the glass, she was aware with every cell of attention she possessed that he was watching her. Not the way a boss watched a useful employee. Not the way a powerful man monitored an asset. The way a person watched something they had almost said out loud and hadn't yet, and were sitting with the weight of that unspent honesty and had not yet decided what to do with it. She knew because she knew him. She knew because she was doing the same thing. She had told him to do something about it before someone else did. She hadn't expected him to take exactly 4 days. On Thursday morning, Elena arrived at 8 o'clock, made her coffee, stood in front of the good machine for the usual moment, and found an envelope on her desk. Not an email. A physical envelope, cream-colored with her name written on the front in Adrian's handwriting, which she had seen on documents and approvals, and the occasional hand-corrected contract, but never on something that was simply addressed to her. She looked at it for a moment. She set down her coffee, picked up the envelope, opened it with the letter opener she kept in her top drawer, because she was the kind of person who owned a letter opener and used it. Inside was a single card, 3 sentences. "There is a reservation at Carmine's under my name tonight at 8 o'clock. You don't have to come. But I would like it if you did." No signature. He didn't need one. She read it twice, set it on the desk face down, which she immediately recognized as a useless gesture since she had already read it, and picked up her notebook and went to knock on his door at 8:07, as though everything were exactly the same as every other Thursday morning. He was already looking at her when she walked in. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning." She sat down, opened her notebook. "Marcus needs 20 minutes before the Tokyo call. Legal has the Delacroix clause ready for your review, and I've scheduled the Sabo background presentation for tomorrow afternoon. I want 2 more days on the financial trail before we commit that to a meeting agenda." "Fine. The board packet goes out Friday. I need your signature on the capital allocation section by noon. I'll have it by 10. She wrote that down. She did not look up. She could feel him watching her the same way she could feel the weather change before rain arrived, a pressure shift barely perceptible that her body had learned to read before her conscious mind caught up. "Elena?" "Yes." "The envelope." She looked up. He was sitting exactly as he always sat, straight still, occupying his space with the total physical certainty of a man who had never had to think about where his body belonged in a room. His expression was as controlled as it always was. And yet, "I got it," she said. "And—" She held his gaze. "I have 4 hours of calls to manage before noon, a board packet and 2 open legal reviews." "That's not an answer." "It's my morning," she said. "I'll give you an answer at 8 o'clock tonight." Something moved through his expression. Not quite a smile. Something more careful and more real than a smile. "All right," he said. She went back to her desk and did 4 hours of work with the precision and focus that had always characterized her. And she did not think about the card, and she thought about the card constantly. And both of those things were true simultaneously. She went to Carmine's. She had known she would go from the moment she read the card, which was the honest truth she'd been carrying all day. She went home after work, changed not dramatically. Nothing that announced an event, just the difference between the day's professional armor and something that was still composed but quieter, and arrived at 8 o'clock. He was already there. Already. He stood when she came in, which she had seen him do for clients and partners and people he was being strategically courteous to. This was different. He stood the way people stood when the person they were waiting for had actually arrived. She sat across from him. The table was good, a corner placement private with enough distance from the surrounding tables that conversation had room to breathe. He had chosen it, or had someone choose it, because he always thought about sightlines and access and the geometry of spaces. "You came," he said. "I said I'd give you an answer at 8, she said. "This is the answer." The corner of his mouth moved. "I wasn't certain you'd—" "I know." She unfolded her napkin. "You're not good at certainty with things you can't control. I've noticed." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm not," he agreed. And that was the first thing, the first genuinely unexpected thing he had said across a table that she wasn't prepared for, because it was an admission, an actual admission, without qualification or management. She had known this about him for a long time. She had never heard him say it out loud. "This is strange," she said. "Sitting here like this. It feels strange." "It does. That's honest." "I'm trying something new." She looked at him. "You're trying honesty as a strategy." "I'm trying honesty as itself," he said. "Without the strategy component. It's harder than it sounds." She laughed. A real laugh, sudden enough that it surprised her, and she saw him react to it the same way he had reacted to her laughter at the gala. Not with amusement exactly, but with the expression of someone witnessing something they didn't want to miss. "You laugh like you mean it," he said. "I've noticed that. Most people in my world laugh at the right moments. You laugh when something is actually funny. That's how laughing works." You'd be surprised. She wouldn't be surprised. She had been in his world for over 2 years. She knew exactly how performance operated in it, how every gesture and expression carried weight and intention. She had simply never adapted to that, never felt the pressure of it the way others did, because she had decided early on. So early, she barely remembered deciding it, that if she was going to operate in this environment with any integrity, she would have to be herself completely, all the time, without adjustment for the audience. She had never been sure whether that was brave or simply how she was built. "Why tonight?" she asked. He looked at her steadily. "Because on Monday you told me to do something before someone else did. I've been thinking about that for 4 days. I didn't expect you to act on it in 4 days. Would you have preferred longer?" She considered. "No," she said. "Actually, I wouldn't have." The food arrived. They ate, and the conversation moved. Really moved in a way that had no agenda and no operational purpose, in a way that felt like discovering that a room you had been working in for 2 years had a window you hadn't noticed. He asked about her work before him, the corporate law track she had left, the decision she had made that still surprised her old friends. She told him in more detail than she had ever offered in the office, not because the office wasn't safe, but because she hadn't known there was more to offer until she was in a context where offering it felt natural. She learned things. Actual things, not the operational information she had accumulated over 2 years, but the underneath things. He had grown up with a father who ran a small business, and a mother who died when he was 12, which explained certain things she had intuited without having data for. He had been building the organization he now ran for 20 years, starting with almost nothing, and operating on the specific combination of intelligence, will, and willingness to make difficult decisions that his world required. He had not made all of those decisions cleanly. He was aware of what they had cost. "You don't talk about this," she said. "No." "Why tonight?" He looked at her across the table. "Because I've been sitting across from you for over 2 years, he said. "And I have been very effective at keeping that distance, and I am no longer certain it serves any purpose." She put down her fork. "That's a significant thing to say," she said. "I know. It changes things." "Yes. In a world like yours," she said carefully, "changing things is not without consequence. I'm aware of the consequences." "Are you?" She looked at him directly. "Because I'm not a business problem, Adrian. I'm not something to be managed. If this changes the way we work, the way we are with each other, I don't go back to fitting into a category. I don't function that way. I know that." Then you know that what you're proposing isn't simple. Nothing in my life is simple, he said. You know that better than anyone. She was quiet. He leaned forward very slightly. I'm not asking you to become part of my world, he said. You already are. You've been in it for 2 years. You know everything about how it works, and you've never once looked away from the difficult parts. A pause. I'm asking whether you want to be in it differently. She held his gaze for a long time. I'll think about it, she said. That's fair. And Adrian. She picked up her fork again. Don't have anyone follow me home tonight. A pause. Then, and this was the thing she saved and examined later, a genuine expression of something that was almost embarrassed. I've already told them to stand down. She raised an eyebrow. You had people there. 2. On the perimeter. I told them an hour ago. Because you decided I could take care of myself. Because, he said with the careful honesty he was evidently trying on, like a new way of being, I decided you would be irritated if you found out, and you would find out. She pointed her fork at him. That, she said, is the most emotionally intelligent thing I have heard you say. And this time he actually smiled. A real one. The kind that changed the entire arrangement of his face and lasted approximately 3 seconds before he caught it, and it faded back into his usual expression. She filed it away. Yeah, Matteo Rossi's proposal documents arrived in full the next morning, and Elena was in the middle of the initial legal review when her phone rang. Rossi's number. She answered it. Mr. Rossi, I was just reviewing the documents. And, his voice was pleasant, alert. My assessment will take another week, she said. I want the Eastern market projections verified against independent data before I make a recommendation. Reasonable? A pause. I was also hoping to arrange a more informal conversation before the formal meeting, between the two of us. She was very still. The purpose, she said. Context, he said. I think there are things about this proposal that would land differently in a conversation than in a document. And, another pause. I'll be honest with you, Ms. Moretti. I find you professionally fascinating. The article, the gala conversation, the way this office clearly works. I think talking to you would be more illuminating than talking through an intermediary. I am the intermediary, she said. You're also a person. Mr. Rossi. Matteo. Mr. Rossi, she repeated firmly without heat. I appreciate the transparency. I'll pass on the proposal update to the relevant parties and come back to you on timing for next steps. She hung up, sat for a moment, then she got up and went to Adrian's door and opened it without knocking, which she only did when something needed immediate attention. He looked up. Rossi just called again, she said. He wants a one-on-one conversation, described it as informal, context setting. Adrian's expression did not change in any way that someone who didn't know him would have caught, but she knew him and she saw the change. Tell me exactly what he said, Adrian said. She did, word for word the way she reported everything precisely without editorializing, giving him the raw material and trusting him to assess it. When she finished, he was quiet for 3 seconds. He's not interested in the proposal, Adrian said. He might be interested in both, she said. The proposal and the other thing. People do 2 things at once. What's the other thing? She looked at him. I think he's curious about you. And I think I'm the most accessible route to understanding you. And I think he might also be, she paused, interested in me separately from all of that. Which of those concerns you most? The combination, she said. Any one of them alone is manageable. The 3 together create a situation where his motivations are difficult to isolate. Adrian leaned back. Decline the informal meeting, he said. Any communication goes through the formal review process. Document everything. Already doing that? And Elena. His voice was steady, but underneath it that pressure. If he contacts you on your personal line, tell you immediately, she said. Yes, I know. She started to turn. "I'm not trying to control your movements," he said, and the sentence had an urgency to it that stopped her. "I want you to know the difference." She turned back. He was looking at her with the particular directness of a man who was being careful about something. "There's a difference," he said, "between asking you to be aware of a situation because it concerns your safety and trying to manage your choices. I'm asking the first thing." She looked at him steadily. "I know," she said. "I know the difference." "Do you, Adrian? I've spent 2 years learning which version of you is talking at any given moment. I know when you're managing and I know when you're afraid. Right now you're afraid." His jaw tightened. Just slightly. "That's not—" "You're afraid," she said, "not of Rossi as a business threat. You're afraid of Rossi as something that could take something from you." She held his gaze. "I understand that. I'm asking you to understand that the way you respond to that fear matters." She walked out. "Get high." The second week of Rossi's proposal review was the week everything accelerated. Marcus came to Elena on a Tuesday with the expression of a man carrying information he hadn't wanted to find. Marcus was Adrian's head of operations, 52 years old, gray at the temples, steady in the way that only people who had survived significant things became steady. He had a file in his hand. "I need to bring something to you before it goes to Adrian," Marcus said. "I need your read on how to frame it." Elena looked at the file. "What is it?" "Szabo," Marcus said. "The Delacroix secondary partner. The financial trail you flagged 2 weeks ago." He opened the file on her desk. "We found the connection." She looked at the documents. She read fast, the way she always read, pulling the relevant information from the surrounding material with practiced speed. It took her about 90 seconds. Then she sat back. "He's connected to the Ferrano Group," she said. "Third degree," Marcus said. "Through 2 shell companies in Cyprus, but the connection is there, the Ferrano Group." Elena knew the name from documents and briefings, and the occasional reference in conversations she was included in because Adrian trusted her to be included. They were the primary competing organization in a specific class of business. Adrian ran, not direct competitors in most markets, but fundamentally opposed in interests and methodology, with a history of conflict that predated Elena's involvement with the office by a decade. "Delacroix didn't know," Marcus said. "I'm confident of that. They were sold Szabo as a clean partner." "Which means someone sold them Szabo specifically to create this connection," Elena said. "Yes." She looked at Marcus. "How long has this been in motion?" "Best estimate 8 months." He paused. "The Bella Vita Gala was not a coincidence, Elena. The introduction Delacroix made to Adrian that evening was engineered. The partnership proposal, the specific table placement, the timing of the approach, all of it was designed to create a pathway to a contract that would embed a Ferrano-linked entity in Valenti operations." She was very still. "And Matteo Rossi," she said. Marcus looked at her. "That's what I don't know yet," he said. "He might be part of it. He might be a separate element that's been layered on top of it. He might be completely separate." He closed the file. But his timing and his specific interest in this office landed in the middle of an active operation targeting Adrian, and that's too many coincidences for me to be comfortable with. She nodded. "Give me 20 minutes before you take this to Adrian." "Elena." 20 minutes, Marcus. "Please." He gave her a long look, then he nodded and walked away. She sat at her desk for those 20 minutes and thought with the focused intensity she brought to every problem that mattered. Not panicked, not reactive, just thinking clearly and completely about what she was looking at. Someone had spent 8 months building a pathway into Adrian's operations through a legitimate business relationship. The gala had been the activation point. The Delacroix partnership, which Adrian had been pursuing as a significant legitimate expansion, had been contaminated at the source before he ever sat down to negotiate it. And now a parallel thread involving a man who had been courting Elena's professional attention for 3 weeks sat in the middle of the picture, and she couldn't yet determine whether the threads were connected or coincidental. She thought about the things Rossi had said to her, about Adrian, about wanting to understand how he worked, about finding Elena specifically interesting. She thought about the proposal documents, which were good, genuinely, substantially good in ways that had impressed her professional assessment, and made the manipulation harder to see if it was there. She thought about Adrian on Thursday night saying, "I'm asking whether you want to be in it differently." About the way he had looked at her with the careful honesty of a man attempting something new and vulnerable in a world where vulnerability had always been the thing that got people killed. She stood up, went to his office, opened the door. "Close the door," she said. He looked at her expression and closed the laptop. "Sit down," she said. And she was aware that she was giving him instructions in his own office and that he was following them without comment, which was its own kind of significant. She sat across from him, put her hands flat on the desk. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to hear it completely before you respond." He said nothing. He was very still. "The Delacroix connection has been compromised for 8 months, she said. "Sabo is Farano-linked. 3rd degree through Cyprus. Marcus has the documentation." She watched his face do the contained change that only she would have caught. The gala was not a coincidence. The partnership approach was engineered. Someone has been building a pathway into your operations through a legitimate business relationship since before I ran the initial flag on Sabo 2 weeks ago. Silence. "There's more," she said. "Tell me." "I don't know yet where Rossi fits. He might be part of it. He might be a separate element used to create distraction or additional access. He might be genuinely separate." She held his gaze. "But I have been the primary interface with his approach for 3 weeks. And if he is connected to this operation, then someone has been using the pathway. They identified me, my access to you, my position in this office, as a secondary vector." The silence that followed was different from the ones before it. Adrian was not a man who showed fear. She had said that to Greta. It was true in the operational sense. She had seen him in situations of genuine danger, real threat, and he had responded with a cold precision that had nothing of panic in it. He processed threat the way he processed everything completely, and without the interference of emotion. But she was watching him now, and she was watching something happen in him that she had no prior reference point for, because it wasn't about the operational threat, which he was already cataloging and beginning to organize a response to. It was about her. He was realizing in real time that someone had spent weeks maneuvering around his defenses by moving toward the person he least wanted in proximity to that kind of danger. "Adrian," she said. His eyes came back to her. They had gone somewhere else for a moment. Somewhere operational. Somewhere that was already 3 steps ahead and planning, and she pulled them back with her voice. "I'm telling you this," she said, "before Marcus comes in with the file, because I want you to hear it from me first, and because I want you to understand something, while you still can, before the operational mode takes over completely." He waited. "I'm not a vulnerability," she said. "I know that's what this looks like. Someone found the access point, and it's me, and I know that's going to feel to you like a confirmation of every reason you've spent 2 years maintaining professional distance." She kept her voice steady. "But I am not a vulnerability. I'm the person who flagged Sabo before anyone else did. I'm the person who identified that Rossi's questions were oriented wrong. I'm the person who asked Marcus for 20 minutes so you could hear this from me instead of from a briefing document." He was looking at her with an intensity she had rarely been on the receiving end of. Complete attention. The kind that left no part of the person looking anywhere else. "I know that," he said. His voice was quiet. "Do you? Because in about 30 seconds, Marcus is going to knock on that door and you're going to shift into operational response, and there's going to be a very strong impulse to put distance between me and this situation in the name of protection." "Elena." "Don't," she said. "Don't make me a thing to be moved out of the way. Don't use safety as a reason to take me out of the room where I'm most useful." She leaned forward. "I know how this works better than almost anyone you have. I know the documents and the relationships and the history. Take me out of this, and you make yourself weaker, not safer." He looked at her. "That's the argument," she said. "The professional one. And it's true. But there's another one, and I'm going to say it because we apparently say things now. She watched his expression change, a very small shift, a softening at the edges of that intensity. I don't want to be kept safe in another room while something happens in here, she said. That's not who I am, you know that. If you've paid the kind of attention I think you've been paying, you know I won't function well in a protected position away from the work. I'll worry. I'll work around whatever barrier you put up. She paused. I'd rather be beside you than waiting somewhere for news. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, that's the most honest thing you've ever said to me. It's been an honest week, she said. The knock on the door came, Marcus with the file exactly on time. She stood up. Come in, Adrian said without looking away from her. Marcus entered, looked at both of them with the perceptiveness of a man who had been in this organization for 15 years and said nothing about what he was clearly reading in the room. I'll need Elena in this meeting, Adrian said. Marcus didn't blink. I assumed. She sat back down. The meeting lasted 2 hours. By the end of it, the picture was mostly assembled. The Ferrano Group had been running a long-game operation designed to insert a financial connection into Valenti Holdings through the Delacroix partnership. The mechanism was sophisticated, not a direct attack, nothing that could be traced back if it was discovered early, but a slow infiltration designed to create leverage over time. If the contract had been signed with Sabo in place, the Ferrano Group would have had a documented financial relationship with a Valenti-adjacent entity within 18 months. The kind of relationship that could be activated, publicized, or weaponized at a later date. The Rossi question remained open. Marcus's team had found no direct connection between Rossi and the Ferrano Group, but they had found something else. 3 meetings in the past 4 months between Rossi and a man named Caruso, who was a known intermediary. Not conclusive, not nothing. We approach Rossi, Adrian said when the operational analysis was complete. Directly, not through the proposal process. I'll arrange, Elena started. I'll arrange it, Adrian said, not cutting her off, meeting her eyes as he said it. I want to sit across from him myself. She understood. Some things required his specific presence, his specific read. She nodded. But I want you in the room, he said. Marcus made a note. I also want the Delacroix contact to know about Sabo before Friday. Adrian continued. They were used. I'm not interested in punishing them for it. I'm interested in whether they help us understand the scope. I'll handle Delacroix, Elena said. I know you will. He looked at her with the particular expression she was adding to her internal catalog, the one that was not quite professional and not quite the other thing either, but lived in the territory between them. That's why I said it. The meeting concluded. Marcus left. Elena began gathering the documents. Elena. She looked up. He had not moved from behind his desk. He was sitting with his hands flat on the surface, unconsciously mirroring what she had done when she came in, though she doubted he knew it, and he was looking at her with something that had come through the 2-hour operational meeting intact, which was itself remarkable. Thank you, he said, for the 20 minutes. She looked at him. For coming to me first, he said. For how you said it. She picked up the last document. You deserve to hear it clearly. You always make sure I hear things clearly, he said. I've relied on that for 2 years without being honest about how much. She stopped. She stood across from him with a folder of operational documents in her hands, in the office they had occupied together for over 2 years, in the aftermath of a meeting about a threat that had been specifically designed to exploit her position in his world. And she felt the weight of all of it, the professional and the personal and the dangerous and the careful, and the thing that had been building since a terrace and a cracked glass, and a 2-word compliment about a man neither of them was thinking about anymore. We're going to get through this, she said. The Ferrano situation. We're going to dismantle what they built and close the pathway, and do it without giving them anything usable. You know how to do this. We know how to do this, he said. She looked at him. You said we, he said, quietly, without making it larger than it was, but not making it smaller either. She had said we. She was aware that she had said we. She had said it without thinking, which was its own kind of honesty. "I'll have the Delacroix contact brief ready by morning," she said. "I know." She walked to the door. "Elena?" She stopped for the third time and thought briefly that he was going to make her completely incapable of leaving this office. "Tonight," he said. "Carmine's. 8 o'clock, if you want." She had her back to him. She kept it there for 1 second, 2. "I'll think about it," she said. "You already know the answer." She did know the answer. She walked out without confirming it because some things didn't need confirmation. They were simply true, and both people knew it, and that knowledge sat between them like a fourth presence in every room they occupied together. In the corridor, she passed 2 of his security team men she had known for 2 years, who had always treated her with the professional courtesy that her position required. Today, one of them gave her a look that was slightly different from the professional courtesy look. The look of someone who had been in the building long enough to notice things changing and was filing the change away. She nodded at him, walked back to her desk, sat down, opened the Delacroix file, and began building the brief with the precision that had always been her gift, the ability to take complicated and dangerous information and make it clear and manageable and actionable. Outside the window, Chicago went on being itself, large and complicated, and full of people running operations, both legitimate and otherwise, full of long games and short ones, full of the particular kind of power that cities accumulated over decades. Inside, on the 42nd floor, a woman who had come to work one morning 2 years ago with a leather notebook and a professional composure and a complete unwillingness to be afraid of the man she worked for sat building a brief that might help dismantle an 8-month operation designed in part around the fact that she existed. She was not afraid now either. She was something else. Something that had been building alongside everything else at the same pace, with the same inevitability. She was the person sitting in the center of something dangerous, beside the only man she had ever known, who responded to that danger, not by moving her away from it, but by saying, "I want you in the room." She worked until 9 o'clock. At 8:45, her phone showed a text from an unsaved number she recognized anyway, because she knew his cadence even in plain text. "You're still there." She typed back. "So are you." 3 minutes passed. "Carmine's tomorrow." She looked at the message, looked at the Delacroix documents, looked at the city through the window. "Yes," she typed. She set the phone face down and went back to the brief. But the yes sat in the air of the office, unheard by anyone, just a word sent across 42 floors of a building, in a city where someone had spent 8 months trying to use her as a doorway into a world she had chosen to live in, and it sat there with the weight of something that had stopped being tentative. She had made a decision. Not tonight, not really. The decision had been assembling itself for longer than she had acknowledged, in all the small honest moments, and the direct looks, and the coffee machine, and the card, and the Thursday dinner, and the way he had said, "We know how to do this," without even noticing he had done it. She had simply finally stopped pretending she hadn't made it. The Delacroix call happened Friday morning at 9, and Elena handled it alone. Adrian had offered to be on the line. She had told him no. They need to hear this from someone who isn't going to make them feel like a threat. She had said Thursday evening at Carmine's over the second dinner that had felt nothing like a business meeting and everything like 2 people who had stopped pretending. If you're on the call, they go defensive. They lawyer up before you finish the first sentence. "Let me do it." He had looked at her across the table with the expression she was accumulating, the one that was part professional respect and part something that had no professional category. "All right," he had said. That was the thing she was still adjusting to. The way he said "all right" now, not as a concession, not as a strategic withdrawal, as an actual agreement between 2 people who had decided to trust each other's judgment in their respective territories. So Friday morning she called the Delacroix contact, a man named Bernard, 63 years old, 20 years at the helm of the family's legitimate holdings, genuinely decent in the ways that some people in complicated industries manage to remain genuinely decent, and she told him clearly and carefully what Marcus's team had found. The silence on Bernard's end lasted 11 seconds. She counted. "Szabo," he said finally. His voice was flat with a specific kind of anger, not at her, not at Adrian, but at himself for not catching it. "Third-degree connection," she said. "Through Cyprus. We don't believe you knew." "We didn't know." The flatness sharpened. "Elena, I brought that man to Adrian's table. I introduced him personally." "I know." "If that contract had been signed—" "It wasn't," she said. "We caught it. That's what matters now." Another silence. "What does Adrian want?" "He wants your cooperation in documenting the chain of introduction," she said. "How Sabo came to you, who vouched for him when the approach happened. He's not looking at Delacroix as part of this. He wants the full picture of how the pathway was constructed." Bernard made a sound that was part exhale, part something older. "Tell Adrian I'll have everything he needs by end of day." "I'll tell him. And Elena." A pause. "Tell him I'm sorry. For what it's worth, coming from someone who was used without knowing it, tell him I'm sorry." She looked at the wall. "I will." She hung up and sat with the call for a moment before she typed the summary and sent it to Adrian and Marcus. 2 minutes later, Adrian appeared in her doorway. He had the summary open on his phone. "Bernard sending documentation end of day," she said before he could ask. "I read that." He wasn't looking at the phone. He was looking at her. "You told him we caught it." "We did catch it." "You said we." She looked up at him. "I'm going to keep doing that," she said. "You should probably accept it." Something moved through his expression, quick and warm, and then controlled back into its usual arrangement. How did he sound? Angry at himself. Cooperative. Genuine. She paused. "He said to tell you he's sorry." Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once in the way he acknowledged things that landed with weight. "The Rossi meeting is Monday at 2, he said. "Marcus confirmed this morning." She nodded. "I'll have everything prepped." "I want you at the table." "I know." She held his gaze. "I'll be there." The weekend was the first weekend in 2 years that felt different from all the preceding ones. It wasn't dramatic. Nothing announced itself. She ran on Saturday morning, returned calls to her mother in the afternoon, read for 2 hours. Normal Saturday things. But underneath the normal Saturday things was a new awareness, a shift in how the week sat in her memory, and how Monday sat in her anticipation. She was thinking about Rossi. Not Rossi as the dinner companion from the gala. Not Rossi as the man whose proposal she had been reviewing for 3 weeks. Rossi as an unknown quantity in a picture that was still not fully assembled. Marcus's team had found the meetings with Caruso. 3 meetings over 4 months. Not conclusive. Not nothing. She had been thinking about those meetings since Tuesday. Specifically, she had been thinking about the timing of them relative to his approach to this office. The first meeting with Caruso had been in January. The proposal documents had been submitted in March. He had appeared at the gala in February, the event that, as Marcus had established, was not a coincidence. The sequence was Caruso meeting, gala appearance, proposal submission. That was a sequence. That was a story. She just didn't know yet if it was the story she thought it was, or something adjacent to it, or something else entirely. She called Marcus on Saturday afternoon, which she had done perhaps 3 times in 2 years, each time for something that couldn't wait. He answered immediately. "I had the same thought," he said before she finished her second sentence. "The sequence," she said. "Yes, but here's what I can't reconcile." She heard him moving the sound of papers. "The proposal is good, Elena. Genuinely good. I've been through it 4 times and I cannot find the mechanism. If he's running an operation through this proposal, the mechanism is buried deeper than anything I've seen the Ferrano group use before." "Or it isn't there," she said. "Or it isn't there," Marcus agreed. "Which is why Monday matters. We need to sit across from him." "Adrian will read him," she said. "Adrian will read the surface," Marcus said. "You'll read the rest." She was quiet for a moment. It was a true statement, and they both knew it, and there was something in hearing Marcus say it plainly that landed with weight. "I'll be ready," she said. She spent Sunday evening reviewing everything she had on Rossi. Not the proposal documents, not the financial analysis, but the personal material. The interviews, the profile pieces, the way he spoke in public settings, the things he emphasized, the specific language he used when discussing partnership and collaboration, and what he called legacy business. She was looking for the tells that didn't show up in documents. The ones that only appeared when people talked about themselves and believed they were being charming. She found 3 things she hadn't noticed before. She wrote them down in her leather notebook. She closed the notebook and went to bed and slept better than she had all week. Monday arrived the way important days arrived, exactly like every other day, in the early morning quiet with coffee and the familiar view and the ordinary mechanisms of a morning that held something extraordinary inside it. Elena was at her desk by 7:30. She had the Rossi file complete, her notes integrated, everything organized into the precise structure that allowed her to access any element of it without searching. She reviewed it once more, made 2 small changes and closed it. At 8:03, Adrian walked in. He looked at her. "Ready?" "Yes." "You didn't sleep much," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "How would you—" "You're on your 3rd coffee. You're usually on your 1st at 8. She looked at her cup. She had not consciously counted. He had apparently also been counting. "I was reviewing material," she said. "Find anything." 3 things, she said. "I'll tell you before the meeting." He nodded and went to his office. She watched him go and thought about the specific quality of what had developed between them. Not romance in the conventional sense, not yet, not fully, because they were both people who moved toward important things carefully and deliberately. But something that had weight and direction and the particular quality of a thing that both people had decided was real. Marcus arrived at 9 with the full operations briefing. The Delacroix documentation had come through Sunday evening. Bernard had been thorough, had included correspondence chains and introduction records going back further than anyone had expected. The picture of how Szabo had been inserted into their world was now clear. An intermediary named Pell, who had vouched for Szabo to the Delacroix family 18 months ago, and who had connections to the Ferrano group going back a decade. "Pell," Adrian said, looking at the name on the document. "You know him," Marcus said. "I knew his father," Adrian said. There was something in the way he said it, layered careful, the particular tone of history that went beyond business. His father was honest. The son took a different direction. Nobody said anything for a moment. "Do we have eyes on Pell's current location?" Adrian asked. "Working on it," Marcus said. "I want to know before end of day." "Understood." Elena made a note in her notebook. Not because she would forget, she didn't forget things, but because the physical act of writing helped her think, and she was thinking right now about the chain, Pell to Szabo, to Delacroix, to the gala, to the contract that hadn't been signed. 8 months of careful construction, the kind of patience that only people with specific goals and specific grievances maintained. "What did the Ferrano group want?" she said. Both men looked at her. "Not the mechanism," she said. "The end goal. A documented financial relationship embedded in Valenti operations is a tool. The question is what they were going to use the tool for." She looked at Adrian. "You've been in conflict with the Ferrano group for how long?" 11 years, Adrian said. "And in 11 years, what's the one thing they've never been able to get?" The silence lasted 4 seconds. "Legitimate standing," Marcus said. Elena looked at him. "Exactly. If they can demonstrate a documented financial relationship with Valenti interests, even a third-degree one, even through shell companies, they have something to show the regulatory environment they've been trying to penetrate for a decade. They're not trying to hurt you. They're trying to launder themselves through you." The room went very quiet. Adrian was looking at her with an expression she recognized, the one where he was absorbing something, completely integrating it, rearranging his operational understanding around a new center. "That's the mechanism," he said. "That's the mechanism," she agreed. "And it changes the risk profile entirely, because it means they need the relationship to look legitimate from the outside, which means they would have managed it very carefully, which means the embedded element wouldn't have been activated aggressively, Adrian said. It would have sat there, for years potentially. Until they needed it, Marcus said. Elena nodded. Regulatory pressure, an investigation, a political moment. Whenever their standing came under scrutiny, they would surface the relationship and use it to suggest legitimacy by association. Adrian looked at the document in front of him, then at Elena. That's why the proposal is clean, he said quietly. What? Marcus said. Rossi's proposal, Adrian said. He was still looking at Elena. If Rossi is connected to this, if he's a second thread in the same operation, the proposal has to be genuinely good. Because its purpose is not the same as Sabo's purpose. Sabo was the financial pathway. Rossi would be the public legitimization, Elena said. A high-profile, publicly visible joint venture between Valenti and Rossi interests gives the association exactly the clean external surface they need. She felt the shape of it settling into place. Sabo was the hidden pathway. Rossi is the visible door. Different mechanisms, same destination. Marcus set down his pen. If that's right, he said carefully, then Rossi doesn't know. Elena looked at him. Say that again. If his role is to provide public legitimacy, Marcus said, he has to be genuinely legitimate. He can't be a knowing participant in a covert operation. The whole value of him is that he's clean. So either he's an unwitting element positioned to make an approach to Valenti naturally, without knowing the full architecture, or Caruso told him enough to make the approach, but not enough to know what it's part of, Elena said. Or he knows everything, Adrian said, flatly. Don't eliminate that option. I'm not, she said. But Marcus is right that the architecture works better if he's partially uninformed. The risk of a knowing participant at that level is too high. She looked at Adrian. Which is why today matters, because the only way to know is to sit across from him. Adrian nodded. 2 o'clock. Matteo Rossi arrived at 1:58. He was exactly what he had been at the gala, composed, warm, carrying himself with the ease of a man who was genuinely comfortable in his own skin, and had been for long enough that it had stopped being something he performed. He shook hands with Marcus, acknowledged the other people in the room, and then he looked at Elena, who was seated to Adrian's left, and something moved through his expression that she catalogued immediately. Surprise, quickly managed, replaced with professional warmth. He had expected her to be there. He hadn't expected her to be there like that, positioned as she was central and clearly placed rather than peripheral and supporting. The surprise was about her position, not her presence. She filed that. Adrian conducted the opening with the controlled precision he brought to every meeting where the stakes were real. He was cordial. He asked the right questions about the proposal in the right sequence, allowing Rossi to speak at length to move through the material he had clearly prepared. Elena watched Rossi the way she had watched everyone who sat across from Adrian in this room. She watched what he chose to emphasize and what he moved past quickly. She watched where his eyes went when he was thinking not at the documents she noted, but up and to the left, which was recall, not construction. He was remembering things, not inventing them, which meant he believed what he was saying. She watched the 3 things she had identified on Sunday evening. The first, he used the word legacy 4 times in 20 minutes. Not returns, not growth, not expansion legacy. A word that belonged to a specific kind of ambition, the kind that was oriented toward how things looked from a distance and over time. The second, when Adrian mentioned the Eastern market specifically, Rossi's response was fractionally faster than his responses to other topics. Not dramatically faster, but faster. The Eastern market was the piece of the proposal he had the most genuine investment in. The third, he had not once in 20 minutes mentioned Caruso or the Ferrano Group or anything adjacent to either. That could mean nothing, or it could mean everything. At the 40-minute mark, Adrian said, "I'd like Elena to ask you something." Rossi turned to her. Professional, open, prepared. "The Eastern market projections," she said. The infrastructure partnerships you're proposing in that region, you have 3 existing relationships there. I've verified them. They're solid. She held his gaze steadily. Who else have you approached about this venture before us? A pause. Not a long one, but real. 2 other groups, Rossi said, neither of whom I'll name without their permission, as I wouldn't name you to them. Neither of them moved forward. No. Why not? He looked at her. Different reasons for each, he said carefully. Try one. Another pause. One was concerned about reputational alignment, he said. Their public positioning made association with certain categories of business complicated. And the second had an existing relationship that created a conflict. She looked at him. He looked at her. She said very quietly, very directly, an existing relationship with who? The room was completely still. Rossi's expression did something she had not seen it do before. Something shifted under the composure, not guilt, not the specific micro-expression of a person concealing something. Something more complicated. Something that looked, if she was reading it correctly, like a person who had just realized they were standing in a room where someone knew more than they were supposed to. I'm not in a position to characterize their relationships, he said. His voice was still controlled, but it was different. You don't have to characterize them, Elena said. I already know who they had the conflict with. I'm asking whether you know. The silence that followed was the longest in the meeting. Yes, Rossi said. One word, flat, honest, and waited with something that Elena spent the next 3 seconds unpacking. She looked at Adrian. Adrian was looking at Rossi with the expression he wore when he had what he needed and was deciding what to do with it. You knew, Adrian said. Not a question. I knew a name, Rossi said. His composure was back, but it was a different kind of composure, the kind that a person assembled when they had decided to stop managing a situation and start being straight about it. I knew the second group had a prior relationship with Ferrano interests. I knew it was a conflict. I did not know. He paused. I did not know the scope of what was being built. I was told there was an existing business relationship that created regulatory friction. Nothing more. Who told you? Marcus said. Caruso. The name dropped into the room and landed. Elena watched Adrian's face stay completely still. Caruso told you the second group had regulatory friction with the Ferrano group, Elena said carefully, and suggested that made Valenti interests a better fit for your proposal. Yes. He positioned this meeting to you. He suggested the approach, Rossi said. I did the work independently. The proposal is mine. The analysis is mine. His voice had an edge to it now, not defensive, but precise. I did not build a false proposal and insert it as a mechanism for someone else's operation. What I built is real. I believe you, Elena said. Everyone looked at her, including Adrian. I believe the proposal is genuine, she said to the room, but directly to Adrian. And I believe he was positioned without knowing the full architecture, but that doesn't change the fact that he was positioned, which means this conversation right now is the first time he's been fully in the picture. She looked back at Rossi. Mr. Rossi, she said, what do you know about what Ferrano interests were trying to accomplish through the approach they suggested to you? He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, less than I apparently should have. And then he said, tell me what you know. All of it. And I'll tell you everything Caruso told me. The meeting ran another 90 minutes. What came out of it assembled the picture completely. Rossi had been approached by Caruso 8 months ago, the same timeline that Marcus had established for the Sabo insertion. Caruso had presented himself as a business development intermediary, had introduced Rossi to the Eastern market opportunity, had provided early connections and data that had helped Rossi develop the proposal independently. He had been, from Rossi's perspective, a useful introduction agent. Nothing more. The suggestion that Valenti interests were the right partnership had come from Caruso 6 weeks before the gala. Rossi had attended the gala on legitimate invitation. He had looked up Elena's published work beforehand and found it genuinely interesting. He had approached her at the gala because she was the most accessible route to a professional conversation with Adrian's organization. All of that is true, he said. And I'm telling you all of it because I'm looking at a room full of people who have clearly been dealing with something I was apparently a component of without knowing it, and I would rather be the person who gave you everything than the person who found out later that I kept something useful back. Elena believed him. She watched Adrian decide whether he believed him. The decision took approximately 45 seconds, during which Rossi sat very still, and Marcus watched Adrian and Elena watched both of them. The proposal remains on the table, Adrian said finally. Under modified terms and with a due diligence extension. Caruso does not hear about this conversation. Rossi looked at him steadily. Understood. You'll cooperate fully with Marcus's team on the Caruso documentation. Yes, and you'll understand, Adrian said, that the level of scrutiny on every element of this arrangement going forward will be thorough. I would expect nothing less, Rossi said. He looked at Elena when he said it. She nodded once, small acknowledging. After he left the room, held a particular kind of silence, the silence of people who had just processed something significant and were giving it space. Marcus spoke first. He's clean. He's clean on this, Adrian said. Keep watching. Of course. Marcus picked up his files. Pell's location came through 20 minutes ago. I'll brief you this evening. He left. The room emptied until it was Adrian and Elena. She was looking at her notebook at the 3 items she had written on Sunday evening. She put a line through all 3. You knew before the meeting, Adrian said. I suspected before the meeting, she said. The 3 things I flagged Sunday, they pointed towards someone who was being used without knowing it, rather than someone who was fully participating. But suspicion isn't confirmation. You pushed him toward the confirmation in under an hour. She looked up. You gave me the opening. You didn't need the opening, he said. You had already identified the question. I just handed you the floor to ask it. She held his gaze. We worked well in there, she said. Yes, he said. We did. The word hung in the space between them, the same word she had used last Tuesday, the same word he had echoed without thinking, and which had since become a kind of shorthand for the thing they were still in the process of naming. Adrian. She closed her notebook. When this is over, Pell the Ferrano operation, all of it closed and documented what happens. He looked at her. What do you want to happen? She had expected him to answer differently. She had expected the controlled redirection, the professional framing, not a direct question that put the answer in her hands. I want to keep doing this, she said. The work, the way we do it. She paused. And I want the other thing. The dinners, the honesty. The thing that started on a terrace when I said a word that apparently nobody had ever said to you before. Jealous, he said. Yes. He stood up, came around the desk, which he didn't do, which he had never done in this context, not in this room, not in this particular way, not in the 2 years and however many months of their working relationship. He stopped when he was close enough that the 3 inches she had measured on the night of the gala were no longer 3 inches. I've been afraid of 2 things, he said, in my entire adult life. 2 things only. She waited. The first was that I would become my father's worst version without realizing it, he said. That I would build something and lose the part of myself that knew why I was building it. And the second, he looked at her. The second is standing in front of me. Her chest did the thing it had been doing with increasing frequency since the gala. She held his gaze and didn't look away. That's not a reason to stay afraid, she said. No, he said. It isn't. Then stop. He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. A small gesture, barely anything, not a grand declaration. Just a person touching another person's face with the careful honesty of someone doing something for the first time that they intend to do for a long time. She let him. She looked at him with the directness she had always looked at him with, and for the first time, it wasn't the directness of a professional who had decided not to be afraid of her employer. It was the directness of a woman who had decided not to be afraid of what she wanted. "Carmine's tonight," she said. "Yes." "And tomorrow you tell me about Pell." Her voice was steady. "All of it, not the version you give Marcus, the real version." His expression changed, went somewhere more serious, more layered. "You want to know what this is actually about?" "I've been in this office for over 2 years," she said. "I've never asked you for the whole story, because you never offered it, and it wasn't my place to push." She held his gaze. "It's my place now. I'm telling you, it's my place." He looked at her for a long moment. "Then, the Ferrano group killed someone I trusted," he said. 11 years ago, not directly. They arranged it and kept their hands clean, and I have spent 11 years building a position from which I could make that matter." She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She simply stood in front of him and took in what he had said, with the same steady completeness she brought to everything he gave her. "Tell me everything tonight," she said. "I mean it." "You want to know all of it," he said, and there was something in his voice, a test almost, but not hostile. The kind of test a person ran when they were afraid to believe they'd found what they were looking for. "I want to know all of it," she confirmed. "Not because I need to know it. Because you need someone to know it. And I'm the right person." She paused. "You know I am." He was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "I know." That evening, Pell's location turned out to be the first genuinely clean break in the Ferrano operational chain. Marcus had him in a hotel in the financial district 3 miles from this building, which was either confidence or carelessness, and Marcus was betting on carelessness. He had a meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning with a contact that Marcus's team had now identified as a Ferrano communication channel. Adrian sat in his office at 6 o'clock with the briefing in front of him and Elena across the desk, and for the first time in 2 years, she was there, not because he had asked her to stay late and she had stayed out of professional dedication. She was there because she was part of this, and they both knew it, and the pretense that she was there in any other capacity had dissolved somewhere between a terrace conversation and a Monday afternoon meeting where she had broken an operation open in under an hour. "Pell at the hotel," she said, reading the briefing. "Tomorrow's meeting. Do we let it happen?" "We observe it," Adrian said. "We don't move until we understand the full chain." "What's the end of this?" she said. "Not tactically. Where does it end?" He looked at her. "It ends when the Ferrano Group's 11-year effort to sanitize themselves through legitimate association is documented, exposed, and legally neutralized. It ends when what they did 11 years ago has a consequence they can't buy their way out of." "You've been building toward that for 11 years. "Yes. "And you're close. Very close," he said. "The Sabo operation was their most sophisticated attempt yet. It failed. That failure cost them resources and time. And with Rossi cooperating and Pell under observation, we can document the chain in a way that survives legal scrutiny." She was looking at him with the expression he had been learning, the one that meant she was fully present in what was in front of her and not managing any distance from it. "You're going to finish this," she said. "Not a question. We're going to finish it," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she smiled, not the professional acknowledgement, not the small, precise expression that had lived at the edge of their working relationship for 2 years. A real smile. The kind Greta had pulled out of her at the gala. The kind that changed her whole face. "Say that again in a year," she said, "when it's done and it's behind us and we're sitting somewhere that isn't this office." He looked at her with something she had no word for, yet something that was part of what would eventually settle into a vocabulary between them, a private language built from 2 years of professional proximity, and the week since a cracked glass on a Friday night. "Carmine's," he said. "1 year from now. I'll say it again." She stood up, picked up her notebook. "Tonight first," she said. "The whole story." "Tonight?" he agreed. She walked to the door, stopped with her hand on the frame in a posture that had become familiar over the past weeks, the stop before leaving the moment she had learned to make room for because things of value lived in it. "Adrian," she said without turning. "Yes. Whatever happened 11 years ago, I want you to know something before you tell me." "What?" She turned enough to look at him over her shoulder. "You've been carrying it alone because you thought that was the only option," she said. "It isn't. It stopped being the only option somewhere between a coffee machine and a Monday morning meeting, and you just hadn't caught up yet." She walked out. He sat in the empty office for a long time after that, with the Pell briefing in front of him, and the city visible through the windows, and the knowledge real. Now settled no longer a thing he was circling without landing. That the woman who had just walked out of his office was the most important person in his life, and had been for longer than he had let himself know. He picked up his phone, typed, 8 o'clock. Her response came in under a minute. "I'll be there." He set the phone down, looked at the briefing, looked at the city. Thought about 11 years of carrying a particular weight, in a particular silence, and the precise feeling, unfamiliar and not entirely comfortable and completely real, of someone saying it's not the only option anymore. He thought about that for a while. Then he went to work. Because there was still work to do, and it mattered, and he had always done what mattered. The difference was that tonight at 8 o'clock, he was going to walk into Carmine's and sit across from a woman who already knew his world, and had chosen to be in it, and he was going to tell her the thing he had carried for 11 years. And for the first time, he was not afraid of what she would do with it. He was certain of it. That certainty, knew a little raw at the edges, built from 2 years of watching someone be exactly who they said they were. In every situation he had given them, felt like the most solid thing he had touched in a very long time. He told her everything, not in pieces, not in the carefully managed installments that he gave Marcus when operational necessity required disclosure, not in the redacted version he had given lawyers and advisors over 11 years of building toward a single purpose. Everything. The whole story in the order it happened, with the names and the decisions and the consequences that had shaped every significant choice he had made since he was 31 years old, and the person he trusted most in the world had been killed in a way that looked accidental, because the people who arranged it were very good at making things look like what they weren't. His name was Daniel Voss. He had been Adrian's closest friend since they were 19 years old, the person who had built the early organization alongside him, who had understood what Adrian was trying to construct, and had believed in it with a clarity that Adrian had found and only understood the value of, after he lost it, irreplaceable. Daniel had been the one who saw the Ferrano Group's first approach for what it was before anyone else did. He had been the one who told Adrian they're not competitors, they're predators, and they'll wait as long as they need to. He had been right. And then he had been dead at 32 years old in a car accident on a Tuesday morning that 3 independent investigators had cleared as mechanical failure, and that Adrian had spent 11 years knowing was not. He told Elena all of it. She sat across from him at Carmine's in the quiet of a Monday night that had emptied toward its end, and she listened, the way she listened to everything completely, without the restlessness of a person waiting to respond, with the quality of attention that absorbed and held what it received without distortion. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How much of what you've built in 11 years was for Daniel?" He looked at her. "I'm not asking to challenge it," she said. "I'm asking because the answer matters. To you. And I think you haven't been honest with yourself about it." He held her gaze. And then because she had asked him for honesty, and he had agreed to it, and it turned out that honesty, once you started, had a momentum that was difficult to stop. "All of it," he said. "In the beginning, every decision, every expansion, every carefully arranged position of strength." He paused. "And then somewhere in the last few years, it became something else. Something that was mine, built for reasons I could defend to myself in the morning without needing to invoke his name." "When?" she said. He looked at her steadily. "I think you know when." She did know. She could trace the shift in his operational decisions over 2 years, the incremental movement toward cleaner methods, fewer of the arrangements that belonged to the darker architecture of his world. She had attributed it at various points to strategic calculation, to the changing landscape of the business environment, to any number of pragmatic explanations. She had not attributed it to herself. "Don't give me credit for your choices," she said. "I'm telling you what changed," he said. "Not crediting you, telling you." He leaned forward slightly. "You asked for the whole story. That's the whole story." She looked at him for a long time. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over his. Briefly, the way people touched each other when words had reached their limit. Not romantically. Performative, not hesitant. Just the direct physical acknowledgement of two people who had moved past the point where the gesture required explanation. He looked at her hand on his. "You've been doing this alone for 11 years, she said. "Yes. That ends now." He turned his hand under hers, not pulling away. Holding. "You understand what you're saying." "I've understood it since the terrace," she said. "I'm not impulsive, Adrian. I don't say things I haven't thought through." She met his eyes. "I know what your world is. I know what the Ferrano situation is. I know it isn't over, and I know the next several months are going to be the most operationally complex period you've dealt with in years." She paused. "I'm still here." He said nothing for a moment. "Daniel would have liked you," he said. It arrived without planning the way the most honest things arrived. He saw her expression change, absorb it, hold it with the care it deserved. "Tell me about him," she said. "Not about what happened, about who he was." And so he did. For another hour in the quiet of a restaurant that had stayed open without comment, because certain establishments in Chicago understood that Adrian Valenti's evenings were not to be interrupted, he told her about Daniel Voss. Not the death, the life, the person. She listened until the end. When they finally left and she stood with him for a moment on the sidewalk, in the cool of a Monday night that had become something else entirely from the Monday morning, it had begun as she said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For telling me the true version," she said. "People usually give me the version they think I can handle." He looked at her. "I know you can handle anything." She looked back at him. "I know you do. That's why I asked." Pell met with his contact on Tuesday morning. Marcus's team documented every word. Elena reviewed the surveillance summary at 2 in the afternoon, sitting at her desk, with the precision she brought to everything, annotating as she read, flagging the 3 elements that she wanted Adrian's immediate attention on. She sent it to him at 2:14 and was in his office at 2:20 when he called her in. "The communication channel goes deeper than Caruso," she said before he could start. "Pell is a mid-level conduit. Above him, there's a name that Marcus's team hasn't surfaced yet. Pell references it twice in the transcript, here and here." She pointed at the flagged sections. "He uses the term, the architect, without a name, which means the person above him operates in a way that keeps their name out of spoken communications." Adrian read both sections. "The architect," he said. "It's consistent with how the Ferrano group has operated from the beginning," Elena said. "They've always had someone above the people we can see. Someone who stays clean by staying unnamed." She looked at him. "This isn't Ferrano family leadership. This is someone they hired for exactly this function. Someone external, technically invisible, whose role is pure architecture building operations that can't be traced back. Which means," Marcus said from the doorway where he had appeared with his own copy of the summary, "that everything we've dismantled so far is infrastructure, not the builder." The room went quiet with the weight of that. Elena looked at Adrian. "The Sabo insertion," she said. "The positioning of Rossi. The Gala timing. The Pell communication chain. Those aren't the moves of the Ferrano leadership. They're too sophisticated, too patient. Someone designed this entire operation. And we don't have their name," Marcus said. "Yet," Elena said. Both men looked at her. "Pell knows it," she said. "He's careful in the transcript, deliberately careful, which means he knows the name is significant. which means if we give him the right reason to be more comfortable than afraid, he gives it to us." She paused. "I want to talk to him." Marcus looked at Adrian. Adrian looked at Elena. "No," he said. She had expected that. She didn't react to it with frustration. She looked at him steadily and said, "Tell me why." "Because Pell is connected to people who know your name and your face and your position in this office," he said. "Because approaching him directly removes any ambiguity about your role in this investigation. And because I am not putting you in a room with someone in the Ferrano chain." "I'm already in this," she said. "I've been in it since the gala." "That's different." "How?" "Passively," he said. "You were in it passively." "I've been nothing close to passive," she said, and her voice was even, but direct without apology. "I flagged Sabo. I identified the mechanism. I ran the Rossi meeting. I found the architect pattern in Pell's transcript in under 2 hours." She looked at him with the clear-eyed certainty she always brought to the things she was sure of. "You know what I can do in a room, Adrian. You watched me do it Monday afternoon." "That was Rossi," he said, "who turned out to be clean. And if Pell turns out to have information we need, and the alternative is letting him sit in that hotel until he moves on to wherever he goes next, and the name goes with him." Silence. "I'm not asking you to send me in alone," she said. "I'm asking you to think about this as a decision, not a reflex." She paused. "There's a difference between protecting me and keeping me away from the work. You said you knew the difference." He looked at her. Marcus was very carefully looking at the floor. Adrian set down the summary. "What's your approach?" She had prepared for this. "Pell has been a mid-level operator for a long time," she said. "He's not loyal, he's contracted. The people above him don't share names with him, which means he knows he's disposable. The thing that makes someone like Pell talk is not pressure. It's the calculation that his position is less secure than he thought." She met Adrian's eyes. "If I go to him as a representative of Valenti interests, not a threat, not a law enforcement contact, just a business person who knows more than he expected anyone to know, his calculation changes. He's been working for people who treat him as a tool. I offer him a conversation as a person." Another silence. "You go with 2 of my people," Adrian said. "Visible. Not close, but visible." "Agreed." "And you wear—" "I'll carry the phone," she said. "Open line to Marcus the entire time." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across his face, the specific conflict she was beginning to know, between the part of him that had spent 11 years making decisions alone, and the part that had been, over the past weeks, learning what it felt like to make them with someone. "If anything feels wrong," he said. "I'll walk out," she said. "I know how to walk out of a room, Adrian." He nodded. Once. The specific nod. Pell was in the hotel bar at 4 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, which was either confidence or boredom, and Elena thought it was probably a mixture of both, the particular combination that belonged to people who had been doing something for so long that they'd stopped being careful about it. He was 54, gray-haired, with the look of a man who had spent decades in the comfortable middle of other people's operations and had never developed the survival instinct of someone who had ever been truly at risk. He looked up when she sat down across from him. She had not made an appointment. She had simply sat down. "Mr. Pell," she said pleasantly. "I'm Elena Moretti. I work with Adrian Valenti." His expression went through 4 changes in approximately 2 seconds. Surprise, recognition, calculation, and the specific kind of stillness that was not calm, but its disguise. "I think," she said, before he could decide what to say, "that you've had a difficult few months. And I think the last 48 hours have been particularly uncomfortable because you've had a conversation with a contact who told you something that made the situation feel less stable than it did before." He said nothing. "You're wondering," she said, "how much we know, and whether what we know changes your position." She looked at him with the directness that had served her in every room she had ever walked into. "It does change your position, but not in the direction you're probably assuming." "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," she said pleasantly. "And we can spend 30 minutes maintaining that position if it makes you more comfortable, but I'd rather use the time for something useful." She set her hands flat on the table, the gesture she had made in Adrian's office, which she had found was an effective way of indicating that she was not preparing to move. "You're not the architect," she said. "You're the conduit. The people you work for know that distinction very well. You are useful to them as long as you are invisible, and the moment you become visible, which you are right now to us, you stop being useful and start being a liability." Pell looked at her. "I'm offering you a conversation," she said. "About a name. One name. The person who designed the operation you've been working inside for the past 8 months. We know the operation. We know Sabo. We know Caruso. We know the Cypress chain. We don't have the architect." She held his gaze. "Give me the name and your part in this ends here, today. We document your cooperation and you stop being visible." "And if I don't, then you remain visible," she said simply. "And the people above you hear that you had a conversation with a Valenti representative at 4 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, and you know what happens to visible liabilities." She watched his face work through the calculation. It was not a complicated one from where he sat. She could almost see the arithmetic, the value of a name against the cost of being what she had just described him as. "Brennan," he said. She kept her expression completely neutral. "First name," she said. "Thomas. Thomas Brennan. He doesn't go by either name, professionally uses a company called Tessera Group registered in Dublin. Legitimate consulting on the surface, architecture underneath." Pell looked at his drink. "I've met him twice. He's careful. He won't have anything on paper that connects him to Ferrano." "But you have something," she said. He looked at her. "You don't give a name that quickly," she said, "unless you have something. People who give names to protect themselves make sure the name has weight. What do you have on Brennan?" A pause. A long one. Then Pell reached into his jacket and took out his phone. He opened a file, turned the screen toward her. It was an email chain, 14 months old, between a Tessera Group address and a Ferrano family representative discussing the initial architecture of an operation, described in precise structural terms that told a very complete story to someone who had been studying that operation for 3 weeks. "How do I know this is real?" she said. "Because if it weren't, I wouldn't be giving you the phone," he said. "I'd be giving you a name and walking out. That chain is what I've kept for 11 months as an exit strategy." He looked at her with the exhausted calculation of a man who had been in the wrong rooms for too long. "I'm using the exit strategy." She looked at the screen for another moment. Then she said calmly, "I'm going to need you to send that chain to an address I give you. Right now. Right now." He sent it. She stood up. "Mr. Pell, the conversation we just had didn't happen. You were in your hotel bar this afternoon without incident. You'll hear from neither of us again unless you give us a reason to." She walked out. In the elevator, she let out a breath. One breath slow, the exhale of the effort it took to sit in a room like that, with that quality of surface calm. Then she picked up the phone and said, "Marcus, the architect's name is Thomas Brennan, operating as Tessera Group out of Dublin, and I have the email chain." The silence on the other end lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then Marcus said, in the voice of a man who had been doing this work for a long time and had just received the thing that solved the problem, "Send it to me immediately." "Already sent," she said. Jund. Adrian was in his office when she walked in 20 minutes later. He looked at her the moment she appeared, a full look, the checking look that she recognized now as the one he did when she had been somewhere he couldn't be and she had come back. She was fine. She looked exactly as she had looked when she left, composed and steady, her notebook under her arm. No visible sign of the 40-minute conversation that had just broken the Ferrano operation open at its foundation. "Brennan," she said. "Thomas Brennan, Tessera Group Dublin. Pell gave us the email chain and I have it, Marcus has it. It documents the initial operational architecture directly connecting Brennan to the Ferrano family 15 months ago. Adrian did not move for 3 seconds. "He gave you the chain," he said. "He had it as an exit strategy," she said. "He used it." She sat down across from him. "With that documentation and the Szabo and Caruso chain Marcus has already assembled, we have a complete picture from the architect down to the insertion mechanism. It will survive legal scrutiny." He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen before and was adding to the catalog. "You did that in 40 minutes, he said. "I had good preparation," she said. "Elena, I knew what he needed to hear," she said. "I knew his position before I sat down. The conversation was the easy part." She looked at him. "The hard part was you letting me go." He was quiet. "That was harder for you than the whole operation," she said. Not challenging him. Just saying the true thing, because they had agreed to say the true things. "Yes," he said. Simply. No management around it. "I know." She looked at him steadily. "And it mattered that you did it anyway." The office was very quiet. "Daniel's name," Adrian said. She understood immediately. "Yes," she said. "We have enough to attach Brennan to the Ferrano group, and with the existing chain, we have enough to demonstrate that their operations over the past 11 years have included the arrangement that—" She paused, careful, "that took Daniel from you. It won't be a criminal charge given the timeline, but it will be documented and it will be part of the legal exposure that dismantles their ability to operate." He absorbed that. She watched him absorb it. Watched the specific quality of what happened in his face when 11 years of purpose arrived at the moment it had been building toward. "It's enough," she said quietly. "Not everything you wanted, but it's enough to matter." He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "It is." Nah. 3 weeks later, the Ferrano Group's legitimate standing initiative collapsed. The Tessera Group documentation combined with Marcus's assembled chain and Rossi's full cooperation, which had turned out to be genuine and substantial once he understood what he had been positioned inside, gave the legal team everything they needed. Not a public criminal trial, which the timeline and the jurisdiction made impossible, but a regulatory submission, a series of documented disclosures, a coordinated effort between the Valenti legal team and 3 institutional bodies that stripped the Ferrano Group's primary legitimization pathway at its root and made every future attempt to build one exponentially more difficult. Brennan disappeared from his Dublin address 2 days before the submission went through. His exit was clearly planned, which meant someone had told him it was coming. Marcus spent a week trying to identify the source. Elena told him on a Friday afternoon, "Let it go." Marcus looked at her. "Brennan running doesn't hurt the submission," she said. "It helps it. A man who disappears when regulators start asking questions tells its own story." She looked at him with the pragmatic certainty she had developed over weeks of operating inside something that had required exactly this kind of calculated patience. "We have what we needed. The rest is friction." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. "When did you get here?" he said. "Excuse me. When did you—" He made a gesture that encompassed the office, the operation, the past several months. "You've been here for over 2 years, but when did you become this?" She thought about it. "Around the time someone cracked a crystal glass at a charity gala," she said. Marcus blinked. "Don't ask," she said. He didn't ask. Decim. The Bella Vita Gala came around again in the fall. The same building, the same event, the same assembled city of powerful people, moving through a carefully constructed evening. Elena stood in the preparation area of Adrian's building while his security team ran their pre-event checks, looking at the invitation that she had been looking at since it arrived 3 weeks ago. She felt Adrian before she heard him. The specific quality of attention in a room changed when he entered it. She had noticed that from the very first week of working with him and had never stopped noticing it. "Ready," he said. She turned. He was in the suit he wore to significant events, different from his working suits, in a way that was almost imperceptible, except to someone who had spent enough time paying attention. She had spent enough time. "You're nervous," she said. "I'm never nervous." "You adjusted your cufflink 4 times in the last 6 minutes. He looked at his cufflink. "We've been back to Carmine's 11 times, she said. "We've had the honest conversations, and the operational ones, and the ones at midnight when neither of us could stop working. You told me about Daniel, and I told you about the things I've wanted that I haven't said out loud in years." She held his gaze. "Why would you be nervous about a gala?" He looked at her. "Because the last one changed everything," he said. She smiled. "The real one." "Yes," she said. "It did." He offered his arm. She took it naturally, without the slight fraction of adjustment that had always been present in their physical proximity before the professional management of space, the deliberate maintenance of 3 inches. There were no 3 inches now. There was simply the space 2 people occupied when they had stopped performing distance. They walked in together. The same room. The same 1,200 guests. The same assembled power of a city that moved around Adrian Valenti, the way water moved around a fixed object, with deference, with awareness, with the particular caution of people who understood that certain things were not to be disturbed. Something was different tonight. The room felt it before it understood it. The way that rooms of powerful people always felt changes in the weather of their social environment, a shift in attention, a recalibration, something settling into a new arrangement. They moved through the early part of the evening together. Not performing togetherness, simply being together the way people were together, when the togetherness had been built from something real and had enough structural weight to stand without effort. Greta found Elena at the 40-minute mark and hugged her with the same force she always used. "You look different," Greta said in the direct way that old friends were permitted. "I'm the same," Elena said. "You look the same, but different," Greta said. She glanced at Adrian, who was 20 feet away in conversation with a city council representative, and was, Elena noted, positioned in a way that kept Elena in his peripheral field. "He looks different too." "He's the same," Elena said. "Elena?" "He's the same and I'm the same," Elena said. "Everything else is different." Greta looked at her for a moment. Then she smiled, the particular smile of someone who has been waiting for something for a long time and has finally seen it arrive. "Tell me everything later," Greta said. "There's a lot," Elena said. "I assumed," Greta said, and went back to her own group. The moment came at 9:15. A journalist, a cultural correspondent who covered the intersection of Chicago's social and business world with the particular tenacity of someone who had learned that the most interesting stories were the ones nobody was planning to tell. She approached Adrian during a break in his conversation with a maneuvering that Elena recognized as practiced and deliberate. "Mr. Valenti?" The journalist's name was Cara Solis. Elena knew her work. It was good work. "I hope you'll forgive the interruption. I have a question I've been holding for some time." Adrian looked at her with the polite containment he used for unexpected approaches. "I've been covering this event for several years," Cara said, "and I've noticed that this year for the first time you arrived with someone." She looked at Elena, not dismissively, with the specific interest of a person who had done her homework. "And there's a story that's made its way through certain circles about last year's gala and a glass and a 2-word compliment." The people nearby went very still. Adrian said nothing. Cara looked at him steadily. "Is it true that you became jealous last year? At this event?" The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. Elena did not look at Adrian. She looked at the room, at the dozen people in earshot who had gone to the particular stillness of people who knew they were about to witness something and were choosing not to acknowledge it. Then she heard Adrian say, "Yes," 1 word, without inflection, without the management of image that would have qualified it or redirected it. Simply yes, as direct and undecorated as the truth. Cara blinked. She had clearly prepared for deflection. "You're confirming that?" "I'm confirming it," Adrian said. "May I ask?" Cara glanced at Elena. "What you were jealous of?" He turned to look at Elena. She looked back at him. In the year since a terrace conversation and a cracked crystal glass, she had seen many versions of his expression. The operational one. The careful, honest one that had taken time to develop. The one at Carmine's when he told her about Daniel. The one in his office on the morning she had walked out and left him with the weight of something he hadn't finished saying. This expression was the one she didn't have a word for yet. The one that had been building since the beginning, that had been present in every moment of honest attention. That was the expression of a man who had spent a very long time believing that what he was looking at right now was something he couldn't have. "I was jealous," he said, still looking at Elena, "because someone I cared about said a word about another man, and I realized I had been managing that specific feeling for considerably longer than one evening." Kara was writing. She was professional enough not to look up. "And what did you do about it?" she said. "Eventually," Adrian said, "I did something I have very little practice with." Elena raised an eyebrow. "I was honest about it," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said to Kara without looking away from him, "He was also impossible about it first." A small sound from the people nearby. The specific, barely suppressed response of people who had expected gravity and received something human instead. "He was impossible about it," Elena said, "for approximately 2 weeks before he left a handwritten note on my desk, which is either very old-fashioned or very effective depending on your perspective." "Both," Adrian said. "Both," she agreed. Kara was looking between them with the expression of a journalist who had walked up to ask a surface question and had fallen through the floor into something real. "Mr. Valenti," she said carefully, "is there anything you want to say on record about where things stand now?" He looked at Elena. She looked back at him. And then he said simply and completely, and without any of the management or distance that had once been the defining quality of every public version of Adrian Valenti. "She made me impossible, and then she made me honest, and then she made me better in that order. That's the record." The room was quiet, in the particular way rooms went quiet when something had happened that they would talk about for years. Kara wrote it down. Elena looked at the man beside her and thought about a cracked glass on a Friday night, and 20 minutes she had asked Marcus for, and a leather notebook, and a coffee machine that appeared without announcement, and 2 people on a terrace learning the particular language of honesty late in the evening in a city that neither of them had to explain to the other. She thought about Daniel Voss, and 11 years, and the specific weight of a story told out loud for the first time to the right person. She thought about the word we said without thinking across a desk in the middle of an operational crisis, and the way it had landed, and the way it had been true before either of them said it. "You should have led with the honest version," she told him quietly, under the level of the room. "I didn't know it yet," he said. And now, he looked at her with the expression she still didn't have one word for, the one that was part operational certainty, and part the specific terrifying warmth of a man who had learned late what it felt like to stop being afraid of something he wanted. "Now I know it," he said. She smiled. Not the professional one. Not the small, precise acknowledgement that had lived at the edge of their working relationship for 2 years. The real one. The one that changed her whole face, and that he had been cataloging since the first time he saw it in a different room in this same building. When Greta hugged her, and her composure dropped for 4 seconds, and he had seen for the first time the version of her that existed when she wasn't managing anything. He had wanted to see it again from that moment. He had seen it 11 times at Carmine's. He intended to see it for the rest of his life. A year after that, Elena stood in front of her bathroom mirror at 7:30 in the morning and thought about an ordinary Tuesday, which it was, which was what it looked like from the outside, which was what she liked about it. She was still Elena Moretti. She still arrived at the office at 8 o'clock, still made her coffee, still knocked on his door at 8:07 with her notebook and her pen and the focused intelligence that she had brought to every morning of over 3 years in this building. She still flagged legal clauses and ran background analyses and told him when he was wrong with the same direct calm that she had used since day one. She was also the person who had his personal phone number memorized and who knew the sound of his breathing at 2 in the morning when he couldn't sleep, and who had been in the room when the Ferrano case was finally officially irreversibly closed by a regulatory body in February, who had watched him sit for a long moment after the final confirmation came through and then look at her across his desk and say Daniel's name, once quietly and nothing else. She had said nothing back. She had simply been there. That was what she was. Present. Completely honestly, without performance in every version of things that came, the operational and the personal and the difficult and the quiet, and the occasional 3 a.m. where the city outside went still, and they talked about the kind of things that only said themselves in the dark. She thought about the cracked glass. She thought about a word that nobody had said to him before. She thought about the precise sequence of events that had begun with a 2-word compliment about a man whose name she genuinely could not picture anymore with any clarity, and had arrived through all the honesty and the danger and the Carmine's dinners and the operational crises and the leather notebook and the good coffee machine and the night he told her about Daniel here. Ordinary Tuesday morning. Her notebook on the counter. Her pen beside it. His text on her phone sent at 6:53, "I'll be in before 7. The Hargrove Foundation follow-up moved to 9, "You'll want to brief before." She had typed back, "Already have it." He had sent back a single period, which was his version of a smile in text, which she had decoded around week 4 of the new arrangement, and which she had never told him she found completely unreasonable and entirely characteristic. She picked up her notebook, went to work, not because the work was what defined her, and not because she had no life outside the 42nd floor, and not because she was the woman who stood next to a powerful man and derived her importance from proximity to his, but because she was Elena Moretti, the woman who had walked into that office one morning with a leather notebook and a decision not to be afraid, who had learned an entire world without flinching from any part of it, who had stood in rooms that required everything she had and had given everything she had without apology, who had told the most controlled man she had ever known that he was jealous before anyone else had dared say it out loud, and who had been right and who had stayed anyway, not despite his world, because she had chosen it, clearly, deliberately, with full understanding of what the choosing meant. That was the thing Chicago would eventually understand about Elena Moretti in the years that followed, as she became less the woman beside Adrian Valenti and more the name people said when they meant something about how the Valenti operation had changed, become cleaner, more considered, still formidable, but differently so. She had not been changed by him. She had changed alongside him, which was different, which was the thing that lasted. Two people who had both decided to stop being afraid of what they wanted in the same direction at the same time. That was the story. Not a love story built on a compliment. Not a jealousy story built on a cracked glass. Not a power story built on a man's reputation and a woman's access to it. A story about two people who had each decided separately and then together that honesty was the most dangerous thing they could offer each other, and had offered it anyway, and found out on the other side of it that the most dangerous thing was also the only thing that held.